Chapter 524. The calmness on Paul's face had completely disappeared, leaving only solemnity. There was dead silence on the battlefield. Death and blood were sprinkled in every inch of the surrounding space. They were everywhere. They were all dead. With the energy of the twilight of the gods as the foundation, the setting sun rose and turned into a scorching sun. Under Li Tianlan's complete outburst, the domains of the three of them were twisted into sword intent. That was Li Tianlan's own sword intent. It was also the sword intent that was twisted by the domains of Paul, King Tong, and Charlemagne. Such sword intent did not seem very powerful to them, but it was truly as majestic as the sea. Tens of thousands of sword intents turned into sword energy and swept across the battlefield. The elites of Rothschild were all wiped out. The elites of the Eastern Church, the Violet family, and the Morton family were all wiped out. The elites of the Heroes Club were all wiped out. There were no exceptions. Charlemagne himself was beheaded. It began to rain again in the dead space. Paul's body suddenly shivered, and his face turned pale. Even the people of the Snowdance Corps couldn't believe all this. They were all stunned on the spot. No one could describe what it felt like. The extreme fear turned into unparalleled coldness, which seemed to freeze everyone's heart and will. Paul subconsciously looked around Li Tianlan. There was no one around him, but he was sure that someone was standing here. It was just that he couldn't see it. "Did you see it?" Paul suddenly said. His eyes swept across the void around Li Tianlan. "Even if you do it yourself, you can't do it." He suddenly pointed at Li Tianlan. "If he really grows up, 10 years later, no one will be able to control him. If you support him now, maybe he will kill you then. With that sword strike just now, he even killed the people of the Vatican. Don't you understand? He only has himself in his heart. He has no allies, and he doesn't need allies." There was silence all around. Only Paul's trembling voice could be heard. His voice trembled slightly with panic, but what he said was the truth. Countless elites of the major forces were destroyed with that sword strike. The sword light was like fire. The sky was full of flowing fire. However, the sword intent was extremely cold, cruel, and cold-blooded. That was the real ruthless sword. It was a ruthless sword. No one in the dark world could do that. That sword strike was so ruthless, but it was also so perfect. No one around Li Tianlan could do this. Wang Tianzong couldn't do it either. Only Li Tianlan could do it. Now Li Tianlan had the sword energy of the peak of the invincible realm. In other words, the stronger he was today, the stronger he would be when he entered the peak of the invincible realm in the future. In terms of combat capability, Wang Tianzong might be slightly better than him now. But that sword just now represented absolute delicacy beneath the incomparably majestic. It was flawless. No one wanted to see Li Tianlan like this. Because no one wanted to see a prodigy. That meant absolute invincibility, absolute dominance, and sole will. Behind the glory of the Chosen One was the darkness of the whole dark world. Just thinking about it was enough to make one feel terrified. Paul's breathing was a little hurried. He really hoped to get some response. Because this was his last chance to make a comeback. The first thing Li Tianlan did when he stood up was to fight with Wang Tianzong. That sword might have many meanings. But to Paul, the most important thing was the sword itself. That sword move was earth-shattering, clearly declaring Li Tianlan's position at the absolute peak of the dark world at this time. His strength was fully demonstrated. Wang Tianzong was not afraid of this sword move, but he would not come again. Only when the peak of the invincible realm standing next to Li Tianlan at this time gave up supporting Li Tianlan could the situation tonight be reversed. But there was only silence around. There was no sound to respond to Paul. Paul's eyes gradually became a little desperate. Bang! Charlemagne's headless body, the corpse, stood stiff in place for a while and finally fell down. Blood spilled. Li Tianlan waved his hand. The sword intent swept over. The body of the president of the Heroes Club, who ranked 6th on the divine list, began to become loose, and then gradually shattered. Under the fine sword intent, his body dissolved rapidly and turned into dust all over the sky. The twilight of the gods fell to the ground. A fist-sized eyeball-like thing also appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Holy punishment of void. Li Tianlan clenched his palm. The 2 murderous weapons that had lost their vitality fell into his hands and turned into 2 rings. There were 12 murderous weapons in the dark world now. There were 5 of them on him alone. Blue sky underworld, falling stars, twilight of the gods, holy punishment of void, and dark saint spear. But none of them could fire. Li Tianlan's eyes fell on Paul. The invisible sword intent all over the sky shook with a bang. At this moment, Paul completely gave up all hope. He suddenly pulled King Tong's palm and said in a low voice, "Let's go." He was no match for Li Tianlan, so he could only admit his failure tonight. He didn't even have time to feel sorry for the loss tonight. In the current situation, it was good to be able to run away. But could they really run away? The brother and sister turned around and flew back. The moment they turned around, King Tong clearly saw the determination in Paul's eyes. The sword intent drifted in the night sky like rain. King Tong suddenly broke free from Paul's palm. She didn't speak. A shadow as thick as ink spread out from around her in an instant. The dark shadow had almost condensed into a substance. The domain that had condensed into a substance hit Paul's turning back hard. Paul was completely unprepared. In the huge impact, he only had time to roar, and the next second, he was directly knocked out. She didn't hit Li Tianlan. King Tong pushed Paul far away in the blink of an eye. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and looked at King Tong. King Tong's body was trembling slightly. Her eyes were filled with tears. She was a little scared and pitiful. In the whole of Europe, she was the queen of the Shadow Throne. She was decisive and always kept her word. But in the Rothschild family, she was the unruly and willful younger sister who had almost never let her brother worry about her all her life. Tonight, because of her, Paul was also in a desperate situation. King Tong was very afraid of death. But she didn't want Paul to die even more. So she pushed Paul out. She stayed by herself. The powerful aura surged wildly in her body, and endless power poured into her domain. Vaguely, King Tong was bleeding all over, and her body seemed to have swelled up. "No." Paul's hoarse voice rang out in the distance. "Stop." King Tong stared at Li Tianlan. She could no longer hear other sounds. All around her were the roars caused by the huge power. The expanding power began to shrink to the limit. At this moment, even Li Tianlan felt a hint of danger. He raised his eyebrows and stretched out a hand. He moved like a sword. Boom! With a slight but extremely clear roar, the rain accumulated on the ground all left the ground and rushed into the sky as Li Tianlan moved. The rain flew like swords. In an instant, there was rain all around King Tong. The rain rose from the ground and fell from the sky. Every drop of rain flashed with sword light, which was as awe-inspiring as a sword. King Tong was still compressing her domain to the limit. Layers of sword rain fell on the surface of the domain. Crack, the space was torn apart. Cracks appeared one after another in the ink-like domain. Li Tianlan stepped forward. The rain from up to down kept hitting King Tong's domain. The domain was no longer shrinking, but it kept trembling. King Tong gritted her teeth and stared at Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan was expressionless and stretched out his hand again. The rain in the sky and on the ground converged at the same time. Bang! In the violent sound, King Tong's domain completely lost control and exploded. The terrifying destructive power set off waves of air visible to the naked eye and spread in all directions. Li Tianlan seemed to be unaware of it. He stretched out his palm and slapped it directly on the top of her head. The wind and rain suddenly became chaotic. The sword intent went to the domain and disappeared silently in an instant. Paul's furious and almost irrational roar came over. A red mist rose around King Tong. The mist was soon swallowed up by the messy wind and rain. King Tong's figure was frozen in place, motionless. Li Tianlan withdrew his hand. A series of sounds came from inside her body. A faint and indifferent sword intent kept raging in her body, tearing every piece of her muscle and destroying every piece of her bone. It was extremely quiet all around. The sharp pain spread inside her body. King Tong could even feel that her bones were cracking, which was miserable and horrible. The last trace of blood turned into a red mist and disappeared from her sight. She didn't die. But all her martial arts, what she had learned all her life, and all her power disappeared with the disappearance of this red mist. There was no possibility of recovery in this life. King Tong was still alive. But the Queen of Shadows in the dark world had completely died in this red mist. King Tong's eyes were desperate and desolate, without even pain. Li Tianlan took a look at her and watched her fall in front of him. He didn't know what he was thinking of, but he suddenly felt a little tired and was not in the mood to play. A scarlet and strange saber light came from the front. The shadow gathered on the saber light, which was strange and cold. The saber light, which was hundreds of feet long, tore the space apart, and its killing intent was almost crazy. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly reached out to grab at the void. The extremely messy wind and rain suddenly gathered toward his palm. In an instant, it seemed that the rain curtain within a radius of thousands of meters was pulled over by him. The storm was blooming in his hand. The water splashed like a sword. It was extremely fierce. Except for the time when he fought with Wang Tianzong, it was the first time that Li Tianlan had a sword in his hand. It was a sword condensed by the heavy rain all over the sky. The red saber light that tore the sky came over. Li Tianlan held the sword with one hand and slashed over. There was no sword intent or sword light in the night, only a faint and cold wind and rain. The wind and rain seemed to flash through the space and appeared in front of the red saber light in an instant. Clang! The saber light didn't break the wind and rain. At the moment when the two sides collided, the whole world roared. The huge saber light suddenly broke into two pieces. The saber light was broken. The famous European saber, Ghost Hand, was also cut into two pieces. The faint and cold sword intent whistled past and disappeared without a trace. Paul, who seemed to have not suffered any injury, froze in the air for a moment. His whole body was completely out of balance, and he fell directly to the ground. His face was as pale as paper. He opened his mouth, but strangely, he couldn't make any sound. In the blink of an eye, his face was covered with sweat. There was a slight sound of footsteps. Li Tianlan walked over slowly. King Tong lay on the ground with a dull face. Paul's face was covered with cold sweat, and his whole body was trembling. Li Tianlan looked down at the pair of invincible realm experts of Rothschild. His Majesty Sword Emperor said that I can't kill you too. That's his bottom line. Li Tianlan looked at Paul and said with a very serious face, I'm very afraid of him. Paul looked at Li Tianlan and said nothing. But if I let you go like this, won't I lose face? He looked at Paul for a long time, and then whispered, how about you do me a favor? I was going to update 2 chapters today to make up for yesterday's. This time is not good enough. Can I update 2 chapters tomorrow? Besides, my leave slips are all posted in the relevant section of my works. Apex. Chapter 525. For anyone, life was the greatest wealth, better than any interest. Paul had to give Li Tianlan face. It was a matter of life and death. Therefore, he had to give him face. He was not afraid of too much, but not enough. Under the wind and rain, Li Tianlan was surrounded by clear light. The clear light surrounded him and Paul with a hazy sword intent. In other words, the space where the two of them were was completely cut off by Li Tianlan in an instant and became a new world. No one could hear their conversation. Sure enough. Paul felt the changes in the surrounding space, and his pale face became paler. He muttered to himself. The sword fight with Wang Tianzong was earth-shattering. He killed Charlemagne and Lagos with a wave of his hand. He fought against the murderous weapon. He destroyed King Tong. A gust of wind and rain cut off the ghost hand. Li Tianlan had completely shown his strength, which made all his enemies desperate. But only at this moment did Paul really feel what despair was. This hazy sword intent isolated the entire space, as if it had completely lost contact with heaven and earth. Reality and illusion. Light and darkness. All of them were in one sword strike. This was sword intent and also a domain. Under the cover of this sword intent, Paul couldn't even exert the power of an ordinary person. What was the chosen one? What was absolute dominance? Everything in front of him seemed to have taken shape. The sword intent at present didn't seem to be perfect, but it was not because the sword intent was imperfect, but because the level of the sword intent was still a little low. All of Paul's speculations became facts. No matter who secretly lent his sword energy to Li Tianlan, this kind of sword energy at the peak of the invincible realm was far more powerful in Li Tianlan's hands than in his own hands. His sword intent was truly flawless. In other words, if there was a chosen one by Li Tianlan's side tonight, Li Tianlan's combat capability would be exactly the same as that of a real chosen one. Because his sword intent was really perfect. Paul looked at Li Tianlan. This was what no one wanted to see Li Tianlan. He was surrounded by clear light, which was extremely bright and beautiful. But in his eyes, Paul saw endless darkness. That's it. Li Tianlan nodded, looked at Paul, and then at King Tong, and asked, "How much is your life worth?" Deity had been standing by Li Tianlan's side. The hazy sword intent covered Paul and Li Tianlan. Everything about the two of them disappeared from his perception. Deity narrowed his eyes and said nothing. The battlefield not far away finally began to move. There were no enemies in the Snowdance Corps. They began to gather and sort out the bodies of their comrades who had died. The elites of the Dark Knights were doing the same thing. The four spirits of Zhongzhou State came together. At the most critical time, they temporarily helped the Snowdance Corps and the Dark Knights withstand the pressure and even controlled the Devil Troop. Gong Sun Chi, the leader of the four spirits, slowly walked over. Deity remained calm and turned to look in the direction of the office of the president. Between the battlefield and the office of the president, there was a faint, almost imperceptible sword light that flashed for a moment. Tonight's matter was over. But Deity knew that the chaos in Eastern Europe was not over. Because of the President Palace's silence. Because of the sword light that flashed by just now. It was also because he was still standing here tonight. Deity stood quietly, thinking about the situation after tonight. When the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out, no one could have imagined that the situation would reach this point. The war continued, and blood flowed like a river. The divine and holy lists were already in tatters. All the major forces were leaderless. Zhongzhou State also paid a heavy price. But after tonight, the advantage of the Snowdance Corps would completely turn into a victory. With Wulan State as the center, Zhongzhou State would encroach on the entire Zhongzhou State step by step. In 10 years or 20 years, all of Eastern Europe would fall into the hands of Zhongzhou State. This sounded like a long time. But at that time, all of Eastern Europe would become a sort of Zhongzhou State pointing at Europe, or even a sort of Zhongzhou State conquering the world. This was a real achievement for 1,000 years. Deity suddenly thought of a sentence. In the dark world in the next 100 years, there are 3 words that are destined to be called great. Zhongzhou State, East Emperor Palace. Li Tianlan. This sentence spread throughout the dark world not long ago. That was after Li Tianlan won the maneuver of the 2 academies of Zhongzhou State. On that day, he stood in the Sky Academy and shattered the whole era alone. The future era. 10 or 20 years later, when Eastern Europe completely fell into the hands of Zhongzhou State, it would be Li Tianlan's peak period. Zhongzhou State could not do nothing. Li Tianlan could not do nothing. Compared with today, that might be a real feast. Deity did not want to miss the feast in the future. So he appeared in Eastern Europe and appeared here tonight. The faint sword intent slowly flowed around him. Li Tianlan and Paul, who had disappeared from his perception, gradually appeared. Only then did Deity realize that he had been in a trance for a long time. He came to his senses and glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was looking at Paul. Paul helped King Tong, who was lying on the ground in a daze, up and carried her on his back. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan, turned around, and left, staggering. Li Tianlan and Deity looked at the back of the brother and sister and did not speak for a long time. Marshal Li. Gong Sun Chi's voice sounded beside Li Tianlan, and he sounded a little tired. Li Tianlan replied with a Deity also replied with a Then he seemed to realize something, laughed at himself, and shook his head. Li Tianlan shook hands with Gong Sun Chi and said calmly, "Thank you, General." Gong Sun Chi shook his head and was silent for a while. Suddenly, he said, "I just did what a Zhongzhou state person should do." His tone was calm. But under the surface of calmness, Li Tianlan seemed to see a storm. A red gaze appeared in his field of vision. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked over. The devil troop surrounded by the terracotta army was also looking at him. Li Tianlan was expressionless. "What do you want to do with these people?" Gong Sun Chi suddenly asked. The devil troop had always been an extremely mysterious force of the Wang family of Beihai. Some of them were even the invincible realm experts of the Wang family of Beihai hundreds of years ago. It was impossible to verify their identities over the long years. Perhaps everyone knew that they belonged to the devil troop of Beihai, but they could not produce any evidence. After these people left Beihai, they had nothing to do with the whole world. That was what they said. But tonight, Li Tianlan was the winner. With the remaining power of the great victory, he had a clear guess. The Snowdance Corps might be able to make big trouble for the Wang family of Beihai. At least the four spirits of Zhongzhou state, who were absolutely neutral, would definitely stand on Li Tianlan's side. This was not a position, but their own attitude. Devils of Beihai. They might have been heroes of the Wang family of Beihai. But their performance tonight had already explained one thing. For Zhongzhou state, their existence was meaningless. Gong Sun Chi would not let them go. Because many people died in the hands of the devil troop tonight, not only the soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, but also the soldiers of Zhongzhou state. Li Tianlan thought about it, shook his head, and said, "Kill them." Gong Sun Chi frowned and looked at Li Tianlan in silence. "They can't hold on any longer," Li Tianlan said. Gong Sun Chi took the initiative to mention this topic, not to help Li Tianlan, but because he needed Li Tianlan's support. The neutral party was still weak in Zhongzhou state. But Li Tianlan represented the academics and the giant group. If he could get Li Tianlan's support, Gong Sun Chi could vent his anger on the Wang family of Beihai. However, Li Tianlan also knew very well that they didn't have much time since the devil came out. At least, there was no time for Gong Sun Chi to collect evidence. Without evidence, what was the point of some accusations to the Wang family of Beihai? Gong Sun Chi clenched his fists and said nothing. "General, take my army back to the office of the president to fix it temporarily," Li Tianlan said calmly. "You're not going back?" Gong Sun Chi raised his eyebrows. "I have something to do." Li Tianlan didn't say much. Gong Sun Chi nodded and turned to leave. Li Tianlan looked at his back and then at the crowd in the distance. The sight of the devil troop was still emitting red light. But there were only 2 devils left. There were 12 people in the devil troop at the beginning. There were 6 people left in the war tonight. 4 people died. 2 were here. Where did the other 2 go? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. In the dull and neat footsteps, the Snowdance Corps left the battlefield in silence. Li Tianlan stood where he was until they were completely far away. Then he turned around and sat on a nearby broken stone, saying, "Thank you." Deity's figure appeared in front of him little by little. He threw Li Tianlan a cigarette and didn't speak. Li Tianlan lit the cigarette and took a deep breath. He suddenly coughed. The clear light around him kept shaking and breaking little by little. His aura was completely weak. Deity looked at Li Tianlan with playful eyes. Li Tianlan finished smoking a cigarette, threw away the cigarette butt, and looked at Deity. The two looked at each other for a long time. Li Tianlan took the initiative to say, "You won't kill me? Why should I kill you?" Deity laughed. "I don't know." Li Tianlan was silent for a while. "But I can feel your killing intent. When I took action just now, you wanted to kill me several times." He looked at the rain in front of him. His voice and eyes were extremely light. "I have a question," he suddenly said. "Don't ask." Deity shook his head. "You need to thank me, and I need to thank you." Deity said calmly, "I saw your sword. Your sword is very strong." He bowed slightly to Li Tianlan and said quietly, "The strongest." "So thank you." Li Tianlan's sword energy belonged to Deity. But his sword intent belonged to him. The most perfect sword intent controlled the sword energy at the peak of the invincible realm. At that moment, Li Tianlan had completely surpassed Deity in terms of combat capability. This also let Deity see his future. The road ahead still couldn't reach the end, but it could also make him take a small step forward. Although he couldn't reach it, he yearned for it. He was not far from the end. It was good to take one more step, even half a step. Li Tianlan didn't speak for a long time. He suddenly didn't know what to say. He just wanted to ask if the man in front of him was his father. Deity didn't let him ask. But his attitude had explained everything. If they were really father and son, even if they had never met, even if they were unfamiliar with each other, even if he was better than his father, he would not bow. There was no need. Li Tianlan's face was a little pale. The wind and rain fell and wet his whole body. His eyes were dim and he looked a little pitiful. Anyway, he quietly thought about the scenes tonight. "I still want to thank you." Deity's tone was completely calm and restored to its original indifference. "I said, no matter what, Eastern Europe belongs to the Li family. No matter whose Li family it is, it's not up to outsiders to intervene." Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze from the distance and narrowed his eyes at Deity. His eyes were deep, but there was a hidden sharpness in them. "Of course it's my Li family, my Eastern Europe." There seemed to be a cold shadow in Deity's eyes. He glanced at Li Tianlan. After a long time, he said coldly, "So what if I give it to you for the time being?" "You don't care?" "When have I ever cared?" "If you don't care, what are you doing in Eastern Europe?" Deity glanced at Li Tianlan with cold eyes. "What am I doing in Eastern Europe?" "You should ask your woman." Li Tianlan froze for a moment. He had 3 women now. But only Qin Weibai was qualified to stand at the same height as Deity. Li Tianlan's face became solemn and he said seriously, "What do you mean?" "More than 3 years ago, she said that she wanted the Wang family of Beihai to fall into hell forever. That's why the Purgatory of Heaven capital appeared in East Island. That's why I'm in Eastern Europe now." Deity cooperated with many people. He cooperated with Qin Weibai. He also cooperated with the mysterious Majesty. The cooperation between the two seemed to be in conflict, but it was not. He wanted Qin Weibai to die. But that was after Qin Weibai completed the cooperation with him. Li Tianlan finally understood something. So the Purgatory of Heaven capital came to Eastern Europe this time, not for Eastern Europe, but for Beihai? He asked slowly. "Of course." Deity's tone was calm. "As long as I'm here, Wang Tianzong won't leave. So what ends tonight is the chaos. After dawn, the grievances begin. Just solve them together. Wang Tianzong is not a fool." Li Tianlan said seriously. "It has nothing to do with being stupid or not." Deity's eyes were in a trance. "He's a man. Every man has something he has to do and doesn't want to consider the consequences. Weren't you helping me when you fought with him just now? Deity suddenly laughed. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. He didn't expect that Deity would see the deep meaning of that sword. In this way, he really saw his future. Li Tianlan stood up, deep in thought. Deity and Qin Weibai still cooperated. But if this cooperation was successful, after the Wang family of Beihai fell, what would happen between the Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital? It could only be a bloody storm. It could only be a sword light. Once again, Li Tianlan felt tired. He looked at the drizzling night. After a long time, he asked softly, "We will be enemies, right?" Deity was also looking into the distance and whispered, "Who knows?" Li Tianlan stopped talking and was lost in thought. "Are you lonely?" Deity seemed to see Li Tianlan's heart and asked aloud. Only the invincible realm would be lonely. So Li Tianlan shook his head. "No." He paused and continued, "It's just a little lonely." Deity was silent for a while. He reached out and patted him on the shoulder without saying anything. Chapter 526. The sword-like clear light slowly disappeared around Li Tianlan. The peak combat capability began to decline. Li Tianlan was surrounded by severe pain and weakness once again. He sat on the broken stone, his mind blank, his body relaxed, and he didn't speak for a long time. He seemed to have thought of a lot, but also seemed to have thought of nothing. The sword energy dissipated. The sword intent still existed. He sat there, and the whole night sky seemed to become extremely quiet with his figure. Deity's palm was taken back. The sword energy lent to Li Tianlan was also taken back. The sword energy was extremely pure. It was like Deity's hand on Li Tianlan's shoulder. There was no hostility, no killing intent, and no intimacy. Only pure. Li Tianlan lowered his head. In desperation, Deity said that Eastern Europe belonged to the Li family no matter what. From another point of view, he was naturally a member of the Li family. He was not his father. Then who was he? Who was he? I'm sure of one thing. Li Tianlan lowered his head and didn't raise it. His tone was very calm. I don't know who you are. I don't even know who I am. But it doesn't matter. His voice was soft and seemed to be smiling. What matters is that this is my Li family. Deity seemed to smile. It was an emotionless, pure smile. Li Tianlan said calmly, "So if you want to kill me, tonight is the best chance, and maybe even the last chance." Deity glanced at Li Tianlan and didn't speak. He just sat there quietly, motionless. All the light was behind him, and his figure looked a little dim. It was not loneliness. It was loneliness and boredom. Deity sighed softly. It began to be silent. After a long time, Li Tianlan raised his head. Deity's figure had disappeared in front of him, silently, without any answer. An incomparably gorgeous sword light flashed across the night sky. The sword light was bright and sharp. The wind and rain retreated with the sword light, with a touch of delicate fragrance. Dongxing Rushi appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Looking at the scene in front of her, she was obviously stunned. Li Tianlan smiled. Dongxing Rushi's change was too obvious. The determination of the sword light and her blankness at this time blended together, making her look a little dazed. "It's over," he said softly. Dongxing Rushi let out an ah and said blankly, Some died, some ran away." Li Tianlan looked at the mess in front of him. After a while, he continued to say, "We won." Dongxing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were as clear as water, with undisguised admiration. This was the most intoxicating charm. She walked to Li Tianlan's side and sat down. The silent sword was beside her. She leaned into Li Tianlan's arms and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Li Tianlan shook his head. His current injuries were naturally very serious, but his body was undamaged, and the dragon vein he carried was extremely stable. He only needed a few days of rest to recover to his peak state again. This was a fact that would undoubtedly strike fear into the hearts of all enemies. This also meant that in the battle with Li Tianlan, as long as he could not be killed, it was meaningless to inflict serious injuries on him. My sister went back to Zhongzhou State. She said she would get the sword for you. Dongqing Rushi said softly. Li Tianlan nodded. Before fighting with Wang Tianzong, even before deity appeared, he had already heard the roar of the Snowdance Corps. He was sure that there was no one in the office of the president at that time. That was why that sword strike was so earth-shattering. Now Dongqing Rushi was here, but Qin Weibai was not. Obviously, she had left. Tianlan. Dongqing Rushi leaned against him and shouted. Li Tianlan glanced at her. You're amazing. Dongqing Rushi blinked her clear eyes and said seriously. Li Tianlan looked down at her. The two of them were no longer new acquaintances. But this was the first time Li Tianlan stared at Dongqing Rushi's face. She was undoubtedly extremely beautiful, even extremely beautiful. Different from Qin Weibai's dreamlike delicacy, her face looked a little enchanting, and there was a touch of softness and charm at the corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows. But her temperament was extremely clear, and the enchanting perfectly combined in her. She was pure, fresh, sexy, soft, and well-behaved. Dongqing Rushi's every move was the most moving scenery. Li Tianlan looked down at her red lips, which were as delicate and moist as rose petals, and subconsciously lowered his head. Dongqing Rushi opened her eyes wide, and her clear eyes were full of innocence. Li Tianlan raised his head a little awkwardly. Dongqing Rushi reached out and held his face. Her face became softer, and the charm at the corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows became more obvious. The cold midsummer in Eastern Europe seemed to have entered the deep winter. Dongqing Rushi stared at Li Tianlan's face seriously. Her voice was a little soft, trembling, sweet, and even a little coquettish. Come on. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his head. His body was completely relaxed, as if he had relaxed after a big battle. Dongqing Rushi gently put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and closed her eyes. The corners of Li Tianlan's lips finally touched the cool fragrance, which was extremely tender. Time seemed to freeze at this second. Until Li Tianlan's uncontrollable breathing sounded, Dongqing Rushi grabbed his hair. Li Tianlan, who was a little confused, raised his head, and his eyes were a little confused. He knew that there was something wrong with his current state. But when the sword energy dissipated, he really didn't intend to think about anything. The great boredom in his heart devoured his will. He didn't know where the boredom came from, but he had no interest in everything tonight. Dongqing Rushi's soft lips seemed to ignite a fire in his heart. The fire was burning, and it seemed that it couldn't wait to break out of his body. Do you want it? Dongqing Rushi buried her head in Li Tianlan's arms. Li Tianlan replied hoarsely, He put his hand into her pants. Who would believe him if he said he didn't want it? I don't want it here. Dongqing Rushi whispered. Li Tianlan replied again. He forced himself to calm down, but when he pulled out his palm, he couldn't help but pinch the softness that seemed to be under a piece of gauze. Dongqing Rushi's delicate body trembled slightly. She bit her lip, feeling a little resentful. The rumbling footsteps resounded throughout the city. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps gradually approached the battlefield. There was no light on the battlefield, no fighting. It was quiet, only wind and rain. Li Tianlan stood up. It was not until this moment that he was really sure that he was the only one left in the entire Wulan state and even in the 5 countries of Eastern Europe. Supremacy. He looked up at the sky. At this moment, the eyes of the entire Dark World were focused on Reki City. But the general trend of the Dark World had already swept everything. The divine and holy lists were fragmented. The Dark World fell apart. What was the point of having so many eyes at this time? Chapter 527. The sky of Yuzhou was officially shrouded in darkness. The wind and rain were still messy. However, the extremely tense atmosphere in Yuzhou gradually calmed down in the heavy rain. The hidden dragon sea was quiet. However, the Dragon Diagram Park, whose political status was second only to the hidden dragon sea in Zhongzhou State, was completely silent. When the nearly endless artillery and armed police rushed into the mountain road of the Dragon Diagram Park with armored vehicles, the entire Dragon Diagram Park seemed to be completely silent in an instant. The Dragon Diagram Park was not open to the public. It used to be a vast royal garden. Since the founding of Zhongzhou State, it had always been the place where the members of the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State lived and recuperated. There were about 30 single-family villas in the Dragon Diagram Park. In front of each villa, there was a separate mountain road. On weekdays, there were armed police guarding them, and they were heavily guarded. In the heavy rain, the goal of the army that rushed into the Dragon Diagram Garden could be said to be extremely clear. They chose a mountain road close to the center and went straight up the mountain. At the last moment, they were less than 200 meters away from the single-family villa in front of them. This mountain road led to the 6th building of the Dragon Diagram Park. Yi Dongxing, one of the leaders of the Southeast Group of Zhongzhou State, a member of the decision-making committee, the deputy minister of the army headquarters, the chief of general staff and the minister of military intelligence, and known as the god of army of Zhongzhou State, lived in the 6th building. This was just a corner of the vast Yuzhou. The boundless army was like a vast and mighty shadow, covering all the key positions and special places of Yuzhou. In the gradually calming atmosphere, the entire Yuzhou seemed to be silent. All the people were waiting for the end of tonight in fear. No one even knew what was going on. The armed police and artillery stopped less than 200 meters away from the Dragon Diagram Park. The main battle tank that was rolling the road at the front opened, and a general with a Major General epaulet came out. He was burly, fierce, and had a cold face. Through the wind and rain, 200 meters away, he could already clearly see the lights in the 6th building of the Dragon Diagram Park. The general stood at the front of the crowd, looking at the lights in the distance in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. He was the youngest deputy commander of the Zhongzhou State Garrison Corps. Born in the Border Praetorian Corps, he could be said to be a high-profile young man in the army. In tonight's action, he was also the highest commander in the area of the Dragon Diagram Park. The wind and rain were fierce. But he had received the order to withdraw. Military orders must be obeyed. The heavy order firmly suppressed the burning, restless, and even somewhat crazy hot blood in his body. He looked at the 6th building in front of him and was silent for a long time. The lights in the 6th building were still bright. Standing there, the pressure of the entire Dragon Diagram Park seemed to be pressing down on him, turning into an indescribable feeling. It was a mixture of anger, power, and indifference, like a storm. The Major General's body swayed. In this storm, he could clearly feel that something was moving away from him. For example, status, future, and freedom in the future. The most important thing was life. He silently turned around. After a long time, he slowly said, "Pass down the order, withdraw the troops." The Longtu Park was withdrawing its troops. Troops in all corners of Yuzhou province were also retreating. On the sea in the night, countless warships also began to slowly turn around. The pressure that shrouded the entire Yuzhou province began to gradually disappear. As the army retreated, Yuzhou city seemed to recover its vigor under the heavy rain. Hidden Dragon Sea, Golden Autumn Pavilion Study Room. The huge screen had been divided into countless smaller screens. The picture belonging to Eastern Europe was played on a larger screen. On the countless smaller screens, there were pictures of all corners of Yuzhou and the sea. The screen of Eastern Europe was full of troops. The streets and alleys of Yuzhou were also full of troops. All the troops were retreating. Summer Solstice watched this scene quietly, and her tense body finally relaxed. That night in this study room, she completely saw the madness of the Dongqing clan, but she obviously didn't want to accompany the madness of the Dongqing clan. So she called Wang Tianzong. Although Wang Tianzong didn't make a move, what Li Tianlan did next had turned the situation around. It didn't matter why he was so powerful. What mattered was that he not only didn't die, but also won the final victory. After the battle, the divine list was fragmented, 2 of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe were destroyed, and the remaining 2 were also allies of Li Tianlan. Within 10 years, all of Eastern Europe would become the territory of Zhongzhou state. The Wang family of Beihai didn't want to see this result, but at least it avoided a life-and-death struggle with the Dongqing clan. So now Summer Solstice's mood was extremely complicated. She couldn't imagine what Dongqing Wudi would do if Li Tianlan died in Eastern Europe. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou state was straightforward and decisive. If Li Tianlan died, Summer Solstice could be sure that tonight, Yuzhou City would usher in the largest and most far-reaching mutiny since the founding of the People's Republic. Dongqing Wudi's anger would completely engulf all the high-level officials of the Southeast Group who were biased to the Wang family of Beihai and were still in Yuzhou City. The Beihai Corps would also usher in a war that was destined to win but extremely tragic. It wouldn't take long. It would only take one night. After one night, the Dongqing clan would completely fall apart, and Dongqing Wudi wouldn't even walk out of this study alive. The giant group would be destroyed. But the Southeast Group would also change from the most powerful group in Zhongzhou state to the weakest group. The Beihai Corps stationed in Beihai would suffer heavy losses. In the chaos, no one would let go of Beihai or the Southeast Group. Their living space would be constantly compressed. Zhongzhou state would even take over the entire Beihai Corps. Once the military power changed hands, the political power naturally couldn't exist for a long time. At that time, maybe Mount Dibing would really become a mountain in Zhongzhou state, and there would be nothing special about it. In this way, the Wang family of Beihai might still be extremely powerful. But when the foundation was completely shaken or even dismantled, no matter how powerful the Wang family was, how long could they be free and unfettered? Summer Solstice couldn't help but take another look at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi had completely calmed down. Looking at Summer Solstice's eyes, he nodded slightly, as if nothing had happened before. Well done. Li Huaqing's voice finally sounded in the study after a long silence. His voice was hearty and full of passion. After this war, the foundation of Zhongzhou state in Eastern Europe will be unbreakable. Good, good, good. He turned to look at Summer Solstice with a smile. It seems that Tianzong's nomination was correct. Although Tianlan is young, he is really sharp. It's a blessing for the Snowdance Corps and Zhongzhou state to meet such a good commander. Dongqing Wudi and Summer Solstice curled their lips at the same time, but they didn't say anything. Li Huaqing didn't seem to see their expressions. He lowered his head, picked up the phone, and dialed Li Tianlan's number directly. The phone rang twice, and then it was hung up directly. Li Huaqing froze for a moment, and the phone suddenly rang. It was not Li Tianlan who called. It was Gong Sun Qi. Li Huaqing hesitated for a moment, put the phone on speaker, and said hello. Mr. President, this is Gong Sun Qi. Gong Sun Qi's voice sounded calm and indifferent. General Gong Sun, how is the situation in Eastern Europe now? How is Comrade Li Tianlan? Li Huaqing's first question was about Li Tianlan's injury. Gong Sun Qi froze for a moment, and his voice seemed to become a little strange. His Highness Tianlan should be fine. Should? Li Huaqing frowned. Well, Gong Sun Qi's tone was very complicated. Just now, he took Miss Dongqing to the hotel. Li Huaqing blinked and didn't say a word for a long time. It's ridiculous. Summer Solstice seemed to think of something and suddenly scolded him. After the war, there were heavy casualties. As the Marshal of Zhongzhou State, he took a woman to the hotel? What kind of marshal was this? Dongqing Wudi was beaming with joy. He squinted at Summer Solstice and suddenly said, Mrs. Wang, after the war, my daughter and my son-in-law went to the hotel to have a rest. How is it ridiculous? He paused, coughed dryly, and said seriously, even if it's ridiculous, What does it have to do with you? Summer Solstice gave Dongqing Woody a cold look and didn't speak. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and her style was alluring. Tianlan didn't say anything? After a long time, Li Huaqing asked. Gong Sunqi was silent for a while and said softly, His Highness said that everything next is the business of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. Dongqing Woody was stunned. Summer Solstice gently picked up the teacup and took a sip, as if thinking about something. Thank you for Bai Yang and Qing Qing's support. I've written so badly recently, but I still get a reward. I'm a little embarrassed. These chapters are not good. I'll adjust them as soon as possible. Chapter 528. Li Tianlan really didn't need to do anything. At the age of 22, he became the youngest marshal in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State and led the Snowdance Corps into the general trend of Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps had shown the whole world their spirit. They conquered Rekvia, united with the Qin clan, repelled the Jiang family of South America, dismantled the Shadow Throne, destroyed Morton and Violet, imprisoned the Sword Emperor, and severely damaged the Eastern Church. The holy punishment of Void and the Twilight of the Gods had changed owners. The Snowdance Corps marched 900 miles in a day and swept in all directions. Jiang Qinyan died. Black Ghost died. Lagos died. Hostile died. Charlemagne died. King Tong was disabled. Paul was seriously injured. Eastern Europe might be more chaotic now, but all the forces had completely lost their voice. The will of Zhongzhou State could now move unscrupulously in Wulan State. All of this happened in a short span of 10 days. The answer sheet that Li Tianlan handed in might be full of ups and downs, but judging from the result, it was absolutely perfect. He had done everything he could do. The next step was naturally Zhongzhou State's business. The negotiation with Eastern European countries, how to stabilize the situation in Eastern Europe, and establish its international image. The battles and compromises that happened under the light were all Zhongzhou State's business. Li Huaqing was silent for a long time before he slowly hung up the phone. He hadn't talked to Li Tianlan yet, but the words that Gong Sunqi conveyed made him clearly feel Li Tianlan's boredom and exhaustion. So he gave up the idea of disturbing Li Tianlan, turned to look at Dongqing Woody and Summer Solstice, and said slowly, What do you think of the situation in Eastern Europe? Dongqing Woody didn't speak. Tonight, he really planned to fight the Wang family of Beihai at all costs. Although this was a war that was doomed to fail, as the real leading wealthy family in Zhongzhou State, the Dongqing clan was also sure to make the Wang family of Beihai suffer heavy losses. A wealthy family like the Dongqing clan was basically at its peak. Specifically, in Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai might not have any advantage over the Dongqing clan. What made them stronger than the Dongqing clan was the foundation accumulated over hundreds of years, the influence in the world, and the independence of Zhongzhou State. The Dongqing clan was now the real giant in the military. Once Dongqing Woody fell out with the Wang family of Beihai, even the Dongqing clan would be ruined. How could Zhongzhou State continue to tolerate the Wang family of Beihai? At that time, a Beihai province that had nothing to do with Zhongzhou State, no matter how powerful it was, could not last long without its foundation. The Dongqing clan had completely put on a desperate posture. But fortunately, things did not develop to that point. At times like this, Dongqing Woody had to keep a low profile. At present, if the Snowdance Corps is stable, Eastern Europe will be stable. Summer Solstice was silent for a while and suddenly said. The predecessor of the Snowdance Corps was the most elite Thunderbolt Battalion in the Border Control Corps. The Border Control Corps was the most elite army of Zhongzhou State. The most elite army of the Border Control Corps was naturally the most elite army of Zhongzhou State. There were less than 10,000 people in the Border Control Corps today, but when combined together, it was enough to make anyone, even an invincible realm expert, tremble. This was undoubtedly the cornerstone of stability in Eastern Europe. With the deterrence of the Snowdance Corps and the strong support of the Arctic Ocean Command in the rear, wherever this force passed, even Snow Country, which had always been strong in military, did not dare to act rashly. Li Huaqing suddenly glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Today's Snowdance Corps were all Dongqing Wudi's old subordinates. In their eyes, they could even disown Zhongzhou State, but they would not disown Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi still kept his head down, but he nodded calmly. Li Huaqing breathed a sigh of relief and said calmly, Tianlan is still in Eastern Europe. If Tianlan can stabilize, there will be no problem with the Snowdance Corps. No one denies Marshal Li's ability. Summer Solstice said calmly. After the battle that almost made the Dark World fall apart, she had adjusted her emotions in the shortest time and began to think about the next situation. But now Marshal Li is supporting the Snowdance Corps alone. I'm afraid he will be under a lot of pressure. Should we assign a helper to Marshal Li to cooperate with his actions in Eastern Europe? Qin Xinghuan, the former vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps, was killed by Li Tianlan on the spot in front of Wang Tianzong. If everything in Eastern Europe failed tonight and Li Tianlan returned to Zhongzhou State, Qin Xinghuan's death would definitely cause him great trouble. If all kinds of troubles were superimposed together, they would become a sharp knife that would stab Li Tianlan and even the Li family beyond redemption. But now Li Tianlan had taken over Eastern Europe. It was no exaggeration to say that Li Tianlan's contribution tonight was as great as the benefits in Eastern Europe. At this time, Summer Solstice naturally would not ask for a rebuff by mentioning Qin Xinghuan. Indeed. Li Huaqing glanced at Summer Solstice with a smile. The Wang family of Beihai is full of talents. Who can I recommend? The Wang family of Beihai's defense task is very heavy. I'm afraid we can't spare any manpower. What if we make some big shots unhappy and send troops to destroy the Beihai Corps? Now who dares to leave the Beihai Corps? Summer Solstice glanced at Dongqing Wudi with a faint smile. Dongqing Wudi was expressionless and said nothing. From the moment Li Tianlan won and ordered the army to retreat, he knew very well that he could not fight for anything tonight. If he had not dispatched the army to fight against the Wang family of Beihai, after Li Tianlan's great victory, the Dongqing clan could have replaced the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps with their own people. But now, Li Tianlan had won. But the army also appeared in front of the world. Dongqing Wudi was in trouble. Even if he proposed the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps, it was impossible to pass the decision-making committee. What was more, the Snowdance Corps was a special warfare battalion. Before I came here, I communicated with Secretary Wang of Wuyue and His Highness Gu Xingyun. They thought that it was a little inappropriate to send Qin Xinghuan to Eastern Europe. He couldn't adapt to Marshal Li's thinking at all, which proved it. So His Highness Gu Xingyun said that this time, we should simply assign a young man to Marshal Li, so that he can better cooperate with Marshal Li. In a sense, youth meant no qualifications and no prestige. Naturally, it was difficult to threaten Li Tianlan's status. But if it was those two, the muscles at the corners of Li Huaqing's eyes twitched slightly. He chuckled and said, who did Xingyin recommend? Gu Hanshan? Or Wang Xingxiao? I'm afraid that Marshal Li has a misunderstanding about our two families. If they go there, it will be counterproductive, so we should send a relatively neutral person there. Summer Solstice smiled and said, how about Jiang Shangyu? Jiang Shangyu? Li Huaqing repeated the sentence in surprise. Dongqing Wudi also raised his eyebrows. Zhongzhou State had always paid great attention to the growth of the young generation. If not, the final maneuver of the two academies every 3 years would not have become a grand event of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Now it seemed that there were 4 young people who were absolutely sure to break through to the invincible realm in the next 20 years. Li Tianlan didn't need to say more. After Li Tianlan, there were Wang Xingxiao with wind and thunder veins and Gu Hanshan with heavenly king heart. These two were the heirs of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City respectively. It seemed that even if the Li family rose again, these two families could still continue to be glorious in the future. In addition, the last one was Jiang Shangyu. In the final maneuver, everyone saw Jiang Shangyu's performance. This young man, who had been stuck in the fire-flaming realm for more than 3 years, had found his own way. Now, in the eyes of many people, his future was even more promising than Gu Hanshan's. Let Jiang Shangyu be the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing took a deep look at summer solstice. If this was the meaning of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, was there kindness or malice behind this appointment? But whether it was kindness or malice, if this appointment was really passed, there was no doubt that Jiang Shangyu really had a meteoric rise. Dongxing Wudi was also looking at summer solstice. His brows furrowed subconsciously. For some reason, at this moment, he suddenly thought of Qin Weibai and Samsara Palace. Qin Xinghuan was killed. When the Snowdance Corps needed to appoint a new vice-marshal, Wang Qinglei of Wuyue communicated with Gu Xingyun, and then summer solstice nominated Jiang Shangyu as the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps. All of this seemed normal. Everything was normal. There was nothing out of place. But Dongxing Wudi always felt that there was a familiar but inexplicable feeling in it. He frowned and was lost in thought. There was silence in the study for a while. Summer solstice drank water silently and stopped talking. It was impossible for Wang Tianzong to come back from Eastern Europe now, even if Eastern Europe had fallen into Li Tianlan's hands. He was about to break through. If he left Eastern Europe at this time, he would take a step back at the most critical time. He would not retreat. But the general trend in Eastern Europe had been settled, and Li Tianlan had made great contributions. It was unrealistic to charge him with treason. Under such circumstances, arranging for Jiang Shangyu to enter the Snowdance Corps was undoubtedly treating Jiang Shangyu as a knife to compete with Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu would be a good knife, but in front of Li Tianlan, it was inevitable that he was not sharp enough. However, in the Snowdance Corps, as long as he could slightly check and balance Li Tianlan, or even keep an eye on Li Tianlan's traces, it would be enough. Summer solstice glanced at Dongxing Wudi and thought, "You think too highly of your good son-in-law." The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City wanted to move against Li Tianlan. But in fact, everyone wanted to move against the Li family most. Since it was not easy to move against Li Tianlan, some of the Li family's subordinates were still in Eastern Europe. For Wang Tianzong, who was about to break through, if he didn't move against Li Tianlan and directly attack the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he could also hit the Li family hard. After tonight, the Purgatory of Heaven capital was one of the few foreign forces that had not withdrawn from Eastern Europe. The Sword Emperor attacked the Purgatory of Heaven capital and completely occupied the general trend. This was what he should do. Whether it was Li Tianlan or the Li family, no one in Zhongzhou state could say anything. A Sword Emperor without any hindrances from behind was undoubtedly the most terrifying thing. Of course, it would be better if Jiang Shangyu could create some small surprises in the process. Dongxing Wudi picked up the teacup and drank without saying a word. In the high-level meeting that was held immediately afterwards, Chapter 529. The roar of the helicopter's rotors cut through the inky night. Before dawn, when it was the darkest time before dawn, the helicopter from Yuzhou had already flown into the area of Beijiang of Zhongzhou State. In the cabin that was decorated extremely luxuriously and comfortably, an ugly bald man was looking down at a document in his hand and remained silent. The man's appearance was very ugly, but as he sat there quietly, he gave off a kind of dignified and cold aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. His body was tall and sturdy, and he gave off a sense of power. The smell of power and power perfectly combined on his body, instantly becoming a kind of overbearing pressure. Opposite the bald man sat an old man about 60 years old. He had gray hair, wore a military uniform, and had 3 gold stars on his shoulder, which was enough to show the weight of the old man in the military of Zhongzhou State. He was a general with real power. In anyone's eyes, he was a big shot that could not be ignored. The general looked at the bald man quietly. The bald man looked at the document in silence. Everyone was silent. The document was actually not long. It was just a resume. And because the person involved was too young, the resume was not very rich, let alone glorious military exploits. The introduction of the resume was nothing more than some life stories. It was plain and tasteless, causing one to feel drowsy just by reading it. But the bald man's eyes were extremely focused. From Yuzhou to Beijing, it took a few hours to travel thousands of kilometers. He read the document in his hand over and over again, and his frown became tighter and tighter. This was Jiang Shangyu's resume. Zhongzhou State held a council meeting of the decision-making committee 6 hours ago. Jiang Shangyu was to serve as a senior consultant of Kunlun City, be transferred to the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps, and be awarded the rank of general. As soon as the meeting ended, Gu Fenghua, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, and Mo Qingping, the first deputy minister of the military general politics, took a special plane to Beijing, bringing the letter of appointment and the rank to announce the appointment of Jiang Shangyu. Looking at the situation changes of Zhongzhou State in the past 2 decades, the appointment of Jiang Shangyu could be said to be the most outrageous one. Li Tianlan's appointment was originally nominated by Wang Tianzong. Although Li Tianlan was young, he had already shown the combat capability of the invincible realm. Moreover, he had a strong background and the whole giant group behind him. Naturally, no one said anything about this appointment. But Jiang Shangyu was different. Although Jiang Shan was one of the members of the decision-making committee, the influence of the Jiang family could only be limited to Beijing. After Jiang Shan resigned from the position of General Black Tortoise a few years ago, even in Beijing, the Jiang family could not be regarded as absolute authority. In Zhongzhou State, the Jiang family could only be regarded as a second-rate family at most, not even a wealthy family. The force behind Jiang Shangyu was not strong enough. He was not strong enough, and he had never made convincing achievements before. But this time, he suddenly jumped from a deep-sea academy graduate to a high position of special warfare general of Zhongzhou State. Reach the heavens in a single bound? This kind of rhythm was simply about to completely break through the sky. This was something that would never have happened. But at this moment, it had happened. Gu Fenghua also attended the previous meeting. What made him feel extremely strange was that when President Li Huaqing proposed that Jiang Shangyu should be the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps, although there was an uproar in the conference room, the powerful figures standing at the peak of power in Zhongzhou State were just surprised and all chose to agree. Most importantly, Gu Fenghua agreed in his heart. He didn't know why, but he instinctively felt that Jiang Shangyu could do it. Now that he thought about it, it was likely that all the important figures at the meeting had the same idea as him. Jiang Shangyu could do it. But where on earth could he do it? Jiang Shangyu's realm had fallen in the final maneuver of the 2 academies. Now his realm had just entered the thunder-shocking realm, and it was even unstable. Why did all the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State think that he could balance Li Tianlan, who had a lot of power in the Snowdance Corps? Gu Fenghua looked at Jiang Shangyu's resume inexplicably. Then he kept looking at it until now. This resume was too simple and too clear. It was almost the same as a blank space. Only then did Gu Fenghua realize that in the past many years, Jiang Shangyu had basically done nothing. Everyone knew that Jiang Shangyu was very strong in the younger generation. Before Li Tianlan appeared, he was a genius second only to Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanzhan. But no one knew exactly why he was strong. Even in the 3 years in the Deep Sea Academy, he established the 3000 world, but from beginning to end, there was nothing too eye-catching. But his fame grew louder and louder day by day, and finally reached its peak during the maneuver of the 2 academies. All of this was natural. Only when he looked back at Jiang Shangyu's resume did Gu Fenghua find that he didn't know how he did it at all. The boy of the Jiang family is the one who really hides his strength. Gu Fenghua touched his bald head, and there was a complicated look on his ugly face. Jiang Shangyu is the most suitable candidate. General Mo Qingping glanced at Gu Fenghua with a smile. He was the direct descendant of Qi Beizong, the former minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. Even if Qi Beizong retired, he was still the leader of the Special Warfare Group. His relationship with Kunlun City naturally didn't need to be mentioned. Now Li Tianlan is very powerful. Who has heard of the combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22? If he goes to the Snowdance Corps, who can we send? Among the two highnesses of Kunlun City, not to mention His Highness the God of War, even if First Elder recovers from his injury, he can't be the Vice Marshal. If we send someone else, he won't be Li Tianlan's opponent. In that case, it's better to send a young man. There is no doubt about Jiang Shangyu's ability. Now we can only send him. Gu Fengbo nodded and suddenly asked, there is no doubt about Jiang Shangyu's ability, but what is his ability? Mo Qingping smiled, but his smile suddenly froze. What ability did Jiang Shangyu have? He felt that he could say a lot of things casually. But when the words came to his mouth, he suddenly found that he couldn't say anything. Mo Qingping suddenly felt that the situation was extremely strange, and his voice became a little dry. Jiang Shangyu, Gu Fengbo took a deep look at him, and then lowered his head to look at the information. Tonight's meeting fully explained Jiang Shangyu's position in the hearts of the big shots of Zhongzhou State. Such a position could not have been established in a final maneuver. It was accumulated over the years. But Jiang Shangyu clearly didn't do anything. How did he get such a position? And it came so naturally, without any abruptness. Gu Fengbo suddenly felt a little afraid. He narrowed his eyes, and an extremely sharp cold light flashed in his eyes. He was so low-key and secretive. What did the boy of the Jiang family want to do? This person is amazing. Mo Qingping was silent for a long time before he muttered to himself. Gu Fengbo lowered his head, and his eyes became more and more ferocious. Gu Xingyun was seriously injured, and so was Gu Qianchuan. Now he was in charge of most things in Kunlun City. Although he was not the strongest in Kunlun City, he was definitely the most trusted person of Gu Xingyun. At this moment, looking at the information and thinking of the evaluation of Jiang Shangyu by the upper echelons of Zhongzhou State in recent days, he even had an extremely impulsive idea. If this was destined to be a good saber that could not be controlled, it was better to kill it in advance. From early morning to sunset, dusk passed, and the night grew darker. The water-like night flowed slowly with the traces of time. The little fox in front of the Jiang family's headquarters was calm and peaceful. There was a faint sound of flowers blooming and withering in the garden. Jiang Shan stood quietly. He had been standing for nearly 24 hours, and he looked like a statue. In front of him was Jiang Shangyu's villa. There were no lights on in the villa, and it was almost dead silent. As soon as the news that Gu Xingyun intended to let Jiang Shangyu go to Eastern Europe came, Jiang Shangyu walked into the villa and began to meditate. Jiang Shan stood quietly. The decision of the Council of the Decision-Making Committee had been conveyed to him as quickly as possible. Jiang Shangyu rose to the top in one step. He was known as the General of the Special Warfare System and the Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. However, such a rise did not make Jiang Shan feel happy. Instead, it made him feel unparalleled pressure. Because Jiang Shangyu's rise was too high, and the most fatal thing was that there was no foundation below. Even if the Jiang family desperately wanted to pave the way for Jiang Shangyu, it could not reach such a height. Without any foundation, how could he stand firmly at such a high place? Jiang Shan stood here and thought for a day, but he did not come up with a good way. He had never known his son very well. But he was sure that Jiang Shangyu was the greatest pride of his life. He knew his talent and ambition. But at this moment, his only hope was that Jiang Shangyu could keep a low profile and restrain himself as before, instead of becoming high profile with the help of his rising status, and eventually be doomed eternally. Dawn was coming. In the darkest time between heaven and earth, a light suddenly lit up in Jiang Shangyu's villa. The corner of Jiang Shan's eyes twitched. After hesitating for a moment, he got up and walked into the villa, going directly to his son's room. Under the warm light, Jiang Shangyu had finished meditating for a long time. When Jiang Shan walked in, he was standing at the head of his bed, holding a photo frame in his hand and looking at it silently. In the photo frame was a photo that had been stored for many years. The corners had been yellowed, with the traces of time. At that time, Jiang Shangyu was still very young, and Jiang Shan was still very young. He was very small, sitting on his father's lap, his eyes slightly red. A very gentle woman gently stroked his hair, while Jiang Shan looked ahead with a serious expression. Jiang Shangyu looked at the photo, his eyes gentle and calm. Jiang Shan walked over and looked at the only family photo of their family of 3. His face changed, and he sighed softly. I still remember the scene when I took this photo. Jiang Shangyu suddenly said. Jiang Shan's face changed, and he did not speak. Dad, if I remember correctly, that was the first and only time you hit me, right? Jiang Shangyu touched his face and suddenly chuckled. Jiang Shan's straight figure seemed to become a little older in an instant. He nodded and said in a hoarse voice, I'm useless. Who said that? Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows and said softly, whether you're useful or not depends not only on power. In my grandfather's generation, the Jiang family could occupy an entire city. In your generation, the Jiang family could occupy an entire province. Dad, I still don't know what you've endured in your life, but I've lived a good life and I've been very comfortable. These are my heartfelt words. So I've said it many times. In my heart, you are the greatest father and the person I admire the most. Jiang Shan looked at the photo frame in his son's hand with a complicated look in his eyes. That year, was I 7 or 8 years old? Because of a ridiculous trifle, I hurt a child of my age. But his father's position was higher than mine, so my father slapped me hard in the face. Dad, actually, I could understand what you meant at that time, and I never bore a grudge against you. That slap at least made me remember that when I'm not strong enough, I should never provoke or touch things that I can't lift. Jiang Shan was silent for a long time before he said in a hoarse voice, that slap was my fault. If it weren't for that, your injury, my injury has nothing to do with you. It was just an accident. Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said with a chuckle, I'm saying this today just to tell you that I remember very clearly what that slap taught me. I never touch things that I can't touch, but it doesn't mean that I will let go of the opportunity in front of me. You can plan for a province in your lifetime, and I still have a long life. Why can't I plan for a country? I see things in Eastern Europe very clearly, so don't worry. It's okay. He paused and continued, it's really okay. Jiang Shan frowned and looked at his son, who was different from the past. He suddenly asked, do you want to go to Eastern Europe? Yes. Jiang Shangyu laughed and was very happy. I've been thinking about it for a long time. A roaring sound of rotors suddenly rang out from the distance. The helicopter streaked through the darkest night and gradually approached the headquarters of the Jiang family. The helicopter kept hovering in the sky, and a cold and dense sword energy swept through the headquarters of the Jiang family unscrupulously. Jiang Shan raised his eyebrows. He said calmly, come with me to pick it up. No need. Jiang Shangyu suddenly reached out and stopped his father. Feeling the gloomy and cold sword intent falling from the sky, the corners of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. Dad, do you see that? If we stay silent for too long, any Tom, Dick, or Harry will dare to step on our heads. However, tonight is actually very good. The Jiang family has accumulated so much, and we should take a step higher. He pushed the window open. The breeze when day and night alternated blew into the bedroom. Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath. His aura plummeted in the blink of an eye and directly fell to the bottom. Jiang Shangyu's figure walked out of the window. Jiang Shan's face changed greatly. But Jiang Shangyu's figure did not fall. He directly ascended to the sky with one step. In an instant, Jiang Shangyu's aura that fell to the bottom began to rise, extremely violent. A storm suddenly appeared in the air. Jiang Shangyu stood in the storm and directly reached the peak of the chi-controlling realm with one step. He took a step. He ascended to the sky. The lake in front of the villa turned into monstrous waves. The waves froze into ice in the air. Jiang Shangyu stood on the ice, and his aura rose again. The peak of the ice-condensing realm. Jiang Shangyu's figure was firm, and he ascended to the sky. Sparks appeared on the ice. The sky was full of sparks. The aura of the peak of the fire-flaming realm immediately blocked the cold sword energy in the sky. The deep night sky was completely boiling. The sky was rolling, and thunder suddenly sounded in the silent world. A dazzling blue light shot straight down from the sky. Jiang Shangyu's aura suddenly soared. In the night, he seemed to be standing on the thunder. Countless bolts of lightning danced around him in a majestic manner. The road from the fire-flaming realm to the thunder-shocking realm was long. But under Jiang Shangyu's feet, there was only one step. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The violent momentum roared wildly in the night. The night sky was completely distorted, and the lightning continued to spread. The cold sword energy and the helicopter retreated at the same time. Jiang Shangyu was still moving. He was still ascending to the sky. He took another step. Endless lightning bloomed completely with him as the center, turning into a beam of light. It went straight to the ground from the sky, mighty and mighty. Half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu suddenly raised his head. His eyes were unprecedentedly bright and persistent. The lightning all over the sky suddenly disappeared as he raised his head. Jiang Shangyu let out a long roar. A large area of the night sky suddenly became distorted with his roar, and heaven and earth kept shaking. He stepped up to the sky. His footsteps fell. This step had almost crossed the domain of the half-step invincible realm. Heaven and earth were shaking at the same time. The combat capability of the invincible realm. The peak of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu raised his leg again. When this step fell, he would reach the invincible realm. His figure froze in the air. After a long silence, he slowly withdrew his steps. But the momentum belonging to the top half-step invincible realm was constantly surging around him. It was surging endlessly. The first ray of the morning sun finally appeared between heaven and earth. The pale golden light shone on Jiang Shangyu's body, completely enveloping his figure. The distance of a few steps. From the thunder-shocking realm to the half-step invincible realm. He ascended to the sky and stood in the air like a god. Chapter 530. At 6:00 in the evening, the flight from Reki City to Lin and finally landed smoothly at Lin, an international airport after being delayed for 2 hours. The announcer's voice echoed in the cabin. But the first-class cabin, which was filled with a touch of natural fragrance, was quiet. Several passengers were staring at a seat by the window, intentionally or unintentionally. Both men and women had complicated looks in their eyes. That was the most beautiful scenery in the whole plane. That natural and rich body fragrance came from here. On the journey from Eastern Europe to Zhongzhou State, everyone in the first-class cabin seemed to be immersed in this intoxicating fragrance and could not extricate themselves. She wore black high heels, simple tight black trousers, and a loose white shirt. She opened her eyes an hour before the plane landed. Under the somewhat unnatural smile of the stewardess, she asked for a glass of water and drank it. Until the plane landed, her eyes were still a little dazed and lazy. She was a real beauty. People had many definitions of beauty. But all definitions seemed to be vulnerable to a single blow when applied to her. Elegant, quiet, exquisite, and languid. Clear and cold, dreamy and illusory, perfect and flawless. Her every movement seemed to carry a kind of calm and beautiful grace. She was devastatingly beautiful and peerless. The seat next to the woman was originally occupied by an old man from Eastern Europe who came to Zhongzhou State to travel. But this seat, which countless people yearned for, was bought by a high-spirited middle-aged man who was full of success. He offered $20,000, and the transaction process was extremely smooth. But from the takeoff to the landing of the plane, for nearly 24 hours, he, who was sitting next to the beauty, did not dare to say a word. It was not that he did not want to. He wanted to, but he did not dare to. The plane finally stopped. The middle-aged man, who had already made a name for himself in a certain field of the domestic business world, finally could not help but say slowly, "Miss, please." His voice was extremely rough and hoarse, with a strong sense of guilt. The woman turned her head and glanced at him. Her eyes were bright and resplendent, like the stars in the night sky. The man suddenly swallowed all his words and coughed awkwardly. "I'm married," the woman said softly. Her voice was clear and cold, with a kind of indifference that kept people 1,000 miles away. "I love my husband very much." After a pause, she continued, "Thank you." The middle-aged man's face flushed red. He stood up in a sorry state and gave way. He stood there in a daze. The woman stood up and walked over. She didn't have any luggage. She just carried a coat in her hand that couldn't be found in Lynn and got off the plane lightly. In the airport, countless stunned gazes gathered on the woman. The noisy crowd gradually quietened down. The woman walked forward alone, calmly walking into the VIP passage. The air distorted for a moment. The woman's figure walked into the corner of the passage and instantly disappeared. A few men who had subconsciously followed her were stunned. They looked left and right and stood where they were, feeling lost. The woman continued walking forward. A figure shrouded in a black cloak took the coat from her hands and followed behind her without a word. A faintly discernible but extremely condensed power spread into the surroundings, completely enveloping him and the woman's figures. The two figures instantly disappeared before everyone's eyes. "How about Saint?" The woman glanced at the man in black beside her. The laziness in her eyes faded bit by bit, and she became the goddess of the dark world again. It was military counselor who came to pick them up. Hearing the boss's question, he shook his head slightly. "We just met. He's not prepared, so it's hard for him to make a breakthrough in the near future." Qin Weibai paused, as if she was thinking about something. "There will be a rainbow above West Lake tonight. It's very beautiful," she suddenly said. Saint froze for a moment and then understood that this should be what Qin Weibai wanted him to convey to Saint. He nodded and took out his mobile phone. The two of them walked forward at a moderate pace. Military counselor sent the text message and continued to report, "Boss, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State have confirmed the new Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, Jiang Shangyu. And I received the news today that Jiang Shangyu broke through overnight." "What realm is he in now?" Qin Weibai asked carelessly. "The peak of the half-step invincible realm. He has the combat capability of the invincible realm. He can be called His Highness." Military counselor took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Qin Weibai suddenly stopped where she was. This was impossible news. But she didn't say it was impossible. She just kept silent for a long time. Before the final maneuver, Jiang Shangyu was only at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. He broke through the day before the final maneuver and directly entered the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. Then he lowered his realm in the final maneuver and retreated to the initial stage of the thunder-shocking realm. But now Jiang Shangyu, whom military counselor described, could already be called His Highness. Thunder-shocking realm. The stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The half-step invincible realm. The top of the half-step invincible realm. The combat capability of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu had crossed 6 thresholds overnight. And all of them were thresholds that could trap ordinary geniuses for a lifetime. "No one can do this," Qin Weibai said slowly. This was completely impossible. He kept breaking through realms overnight. If martial arts were so easy to break through, why were invincible realm experts so rare? In the entire dark world, there were even a few experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Jiang Shangyu's performance was no longer something that could be explained by the so-called talent and his own path. This was a real step to the sky, even more exaggerated than his current position. "There's only one explanation," Qin Weibai continued. But before she finished speaking, military counselor had already shook his head. "This is impossible. No matter how talented he was, it was impossible to cross a whole big realm overnight. Even immortals could not do it. The only possibility was that Jiang Shangyu was not breaking through the realm last night. If it was not breaking through the realm, what could it be? Qin Weibai glanced at military counselor and said calmly, "You should know that nothing is impossible." Military counselor followed Qin Weibai with a bitter smile and continued, "There's one more thing. When the situation was the most tense last night, Minister Dongqing issued several secret orders. The Yuzhou garrison, artillery, armed police, navy, and air force all took action, which had a far-reaching impact. Minister Dongqing was under a lot of pressure. Boss, should we show up?" Minister Dongqing, the smile on Qin Weibai's lips flashed away, and then she whispered, "At present, what's the best and worst result?" When Dongqing Wudi issued the secret order last night, she was still on the plane, but it was not difficult to imagine that scene. That was the most powerful deterrent to the Wang family of Beihai and the craziest counterattack. But Dongqing Wudi's move also touched the bottom line of the major groups in Zhongzhou state. No one denied that the Dongqing clan was the most powerful family in the military of Zhongzhou state. But the army was the sharp weapon of the country, not the private army of the Dongqing clan. Last night's movement was bound to arouse the vigilance of the major groups. It was impossible for the Dongqing clan not to pay a price. It's still impossible to judge at present, but a deputy commander of the garrison has been dismissed on the spot for investigation last night. That deputy commander has always been the confidant of Minister Dongqing. In the morning, the General Political Department has sent investigation teams to the armed police and artillery units. In addition, I heard that the Navy headquarters has been changing recently. This was undoubtedly the toughest purge. The major groups seem to have reached an agreement to use the most direct means to weaken Dongqing Wudi's influence in the military. However, Dongqing Wudi could not say anything at this time. In this situation, even President Li Huaqing's attitude would be very subtle. This was naked politics. Except for the giant group, no one wanted to see a military giant who could set off a mutiny at any time. Do something. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and said calmly, "The giant group will be the foundation of Tianlan in the future. This big tree can't fall." Understood. Military counselor nodded. To what extent? It's up to you. As Qin Weibai spoke, she walked out of the airport. It was dusk outside the airport. The clouds all over the sky seemed to be burning in the light of the setting sun, and the world was fiery red. A very luxurious car stopped in front of the door. Seeing Qin Weibai and military counselor coming out, two strong guards next to the car bowed and opened the door. Qin Weibai sat down in the back row of the car and looked at the decoration of the spacious back row space. A strange emotion flashed across her perfect and dreamy face. Military counselor was a little embarrassed and innocent. He coughed and thought, "This has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me." He rubbed his hands and did not know what the boss was thinking. He was more afraid of being blamed, so he took the initiative and said awkwardly, "Boss, do you want to eat something first?" "I'm not hungry," Qin Weibai said faintly. She was still looking at the interior of the car, and no one knew what she was thinking. Military counselor's heart sank slightly, and he smelled a trace of jealousy for no reason. "I don't like this car," Qin Weibai said casually, "Let's change it." "Okay." Military counselor smiled bitterly and said without hesitation. Qin Weibai did not speak and quietly looked at the scenery outside the window. "Shall we go to Saint?" Military counselor said cautiously. "Go to the supervisory council." Qin Weibai said softly, "Communicate with Governor Zhou Yuanshan and temporarily seal West Lake tonight." After the Yuzhou conference, Zhou Yuanshan, the former top leader of Luojing in Zhongyuan, had been transferred to Lin'an as the acting governor. He accepted the team of Wu Jingmin, the founding member of the Li family. Now, although he was the acting governor, he was majestic and could be said to be a man of great authority in Lin'an. However, to seal West Lake? West Lake was huge. Zhou Yuanshan could do this, but wouldn't it be too noisy to mobilize manpower and material resources? "Boss, are you going to the supervisory council too?" Military counselor asked tentatively. "Invite the sword." Qin Weibai said calmly, the core of the 13th floor is in the Supervisory Council. She paused and continued, it has always been in the Supervisory Council. The 13th floor. Military Counselor's face suddenly changed. He thought of the situation in Eastern Europe and couldn't help but say, the situation in Eastern Europe has reached this point? Qin Weibai didn't say much. She just gave a simple, Chapter 531. When they approached the Supervisory Council, Military Counselor, who had been silent for most of the way, said with a bitter smile, Boss, I think it's still too urgent. No one knew what she was thinking about. After hearing the Military Counselor's words, she shook her head after a while. Now is the right time. Tianlan's body is too perfect. Although he is seriously injured now, it won't take long for him to recover. While he is weak, we can take care of everything. Her tone was ordinary, but it was extremely determined. Military Counselor's heart became more and more bitter. He shook his head and whispered, if His Highness doesn't participate in the final decisive battle. Qin Weibai reached out and tucked her hair behind her ear. She showed a satisfied smile and said softly, he has done everything he can. Next is my business. Military Counselor was silent. At this point in the chaos in Eastern Europe, no one could turn the tables. The divine and holy lists were fragmented, and the dark world was in turmoil. The few remaining superpowers had reasons not to retreat. The plan that Samsara Palace had been brewing for many years had many accidents in the middle, but the general trend had never deviated from the beginning to the end. With the whole dark world as a chess game, all the killing moves were concentrated in Eastern Europe. Win? Samsara Palace had never thought about winning. This plan had been officially started in the decisive Battle of Heaven capital more than 3 years ago, but it had been brewing in secret for a longer time. All the preparations, all the efforts, and all the killing had only one goal. It was not to win. It was to self-destruct. From the very beginning, Qin Weibai had wanted to drag Samsara Palace to perish with the whole dark world. Next was Samsara Palace's business. But it was also Qin Weibai's business. Military Counselor turned to look at Qin Weibai. She opened the window with her slender and white fingers. The evening wind blew into the carriage. Her hair fluttered gently, and her fragrance floated. She was as beautiful as a grand and illusory dream. Saint has no hope of breaking through in the near future. My injury has improved, but it's difficult for me to exert my full strength. Even if the core is intact, how can the boss reproduce the 13th floor? His voice was low and hoarse. Among the 12 super masters of Samsara, he and Saint might not be the strongest, but they were definitely one of the top combat forces. Moreover, they were also at the top of the hierarchy, so they naturally knew the plan that Qin Weibai had been brewing for many years. The end of the plan could be seen from the beginning. So it had a firm name. Final Day. Ending an era with the power of a single sword. Since the situation had developed to this extent, the Samsara Palace had already made all the preliminary preparations, and there was no need to plan anything next. The most important part of the Armageddon plan was to drag all the dark forces into this mess. There were countless details hidden in this step, and it had been completed long ago. Therefore, the next most important thing was that sword. A sword that could end an entire era. Naturally, it was the sword of the Chosen One. Furthermore, it was the strongest sword strike of a prodigy at his peak. That would be the true pinnacle and end of martial arts. It would be the strongest sword since the beginning of martial arts. Perhaps some people could stand shoulder to shoulder with it, but they would never be able to surpass it. However, there were no geniuses in this era. How could it be easy to replicate the pinnacle sword of a prodigy? The 12 super masters of Samsara Palace couldn't do that. Therefore, a long time ago, Qin Weibai began to prepare for the 13th floor. 13-story pagoda was not a sword. It was a formation. It could even be said to be the highest standard sword formation in the dark world. It was also the start of that sword. 13 half-step invincible realm masters, Military Counselor shook his head with a bitter smile. This was the plan to isolate him from Saint from the very beginning. But where could Qin Weibai find 13 half-step invincible realm masters to form the sword formation of the 13th floor? The Qin clan has 2, and it was planned many years ago. Qin Weibai said calmly, the Lin clan can send 3. As for Sai City, Governor Situ is seriously injured, but he still has the power for 1 sword strike. Our Samsara Palace has secretly trained 2 in the past 2 years. Although they also only have the power for 1 sword strike, it's enough. Military Counselor calculated the numbers silently. Qin Weibai's eyes looked at the Supervisory Council that was getting closer and closer. She said blandly, the Li family must lend me 2 half-step invincible realm masters. Li Honghe can provide this lineup. The Dongqing clan also has 1. Military Counselor frowned. There are 2 more. If he and Saint were counted, there were 13 half-step invincible realm masters to form the 13th floor. Everything was just right. Qin Weibai glanced at him and said calmly, the other 2 are from the new stream. The new stream. Military Counselor trembled slightly. He thought silently, are we going to reveal all our trump cards? It's time. Qin Weibai said. Military Counselor nodded in silence, then shook his head, and finally remained silent. The figures of the Zhongzhou State Army and armed police had appeared in front of them. Groups of people in camouflage uniforms kept shuttling through West Lake, completely blocking it as fast as they could. On the only way to the Supervisory Council, the number 1 car of the Jiangxia provincial government was parked there openly. Zhou Yuanshan, the governor of Jiangxia who personally ordered to block the entire West Lake, stood beside the car. Seeing Military Counselor's car, he waved his hand. Stop the car. Qin Weibai said. The black car slowly stopped beside Zhou Yuanshan. Qin Weibai and Military Counselor walked out. Hello, Boss Qin. Zhou Yuanshan greeted him with a smile and shook hands with Military Counselor. Military Counselor looked at him seriously and was convinced. Last night, the hidden mutiny in Yuzhou brought unimaginable pressure to Dongqing Wudi. The whole giant group was now in a storm. At this time, all the major groups had reasons to kill the giant group. Under the storm, with the appetite of the major groups, it was not as simple as taking down a few generals. As the next leader of the giant group, Zhou Yuanshan was definitely likely to become the focus of the major group's firepower. But at this time, the governor was still smiling and blocked West Lake without saying anything. He deserved to be one of the candidates most likely to reach the top 20 years later. Such courage and temperament were really at the peak. I'm sorry to trouble you, brother-in-law. Qin Weibai chuckled and said, don't worry. Military Counselor will do something next. There won't be a big problem at home. A strange look flashed in Zhou Yuanshan's eyes. Dongqing Qiuqi was his wife, Dongqing Rushi was his sister-in-law, and his sister-in-law was Li Tianlan's fiancée. Qin Weibai was Li Tianlan's woman. It was okay for Li Tianlan to call him brother-in-law. But Qin Weibai's brother-in-law really made his scalp tingle in an instant. But Zhou Yuanshan's face immediately changed. Last night's storm would not subside for a long time. This matter was jointly operated by major groups. If it was handled properly, it was even likely that Dongqing Wudi would be removed from his current position. It would be great if the Samsara Palace could do something. After the storm, the strength of the giant group was bound to be weakened. But as long as Dongqing Wudi's position could be kept, everything was not the worst. Zhou Yuanshan nodded with a smile and said softly, Boss Qin, did you come here to see Senior Li? If you just want to see Senior Li, why did you block West Lake? Qin Weibai shook her head and looked at the road ahead. The road ahead was straight and flat. It went all the way up and looked extremely deep. Qin Weibai's eyes were a little dazed. She looked into the distance, as if she was looking at the road, but also as if she was looking at another world. I want to go up the mountain, she said softly. Then go up the mountain. Zhou Yuanshan nodded and said, I have informed Senior Li. Well, Grandpa is also here. Take my car and go up together. Military counselor nodded and glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai still looked into the distance and said softly, "You go up and wait for me." Zhou Yuanshan blinked and was a little confused. He wondered if Boss Qin had other things to do. Military counselor opened his mouth and was about to speak. But the next moment, he swallowed all the words back and his eyes changed dramatically. The gentle setting sun fell on Qin Weibai with the afterglow. Shirt, jeans, high heels. Simple and clean. Her hair fluttered gently behind her head. At this moment, Qin Weibai had no coldness, no nobility, and no ethereal and dreamy. The light shone on her, and her figure looked extremely pale and fragile. She slowly closed her eyes and put her palms together. She bent down. In the suddenly changing eyes of Zhou Yuanshan and military counselor, she slowly knelt down. She knelt down on the mountain road. "Boss, you," military counselor's shocked voice just sounded. Heaven and earth suddenly shook. An extremely sharp clanging sound rang through heaven and earth without warning. No one knew where the sound came from, but the mountains and the lake shook at the same time in an instant. There was no sound in the surroundings, only silence. An indescribable sharpness seemed to cover the whole West Lake in an instant. Qin Weibai knelt on the ground, slowly bent down and touched her head to the ground. In this life, she only knelt in front of Li Tianlan when she pleased him. Now she knelt on the vast mountain road, with a humble and pious look. Military counselor hesitated, looked at Zhou Yuanshan, who was a little dull, and pulled him. They got in the car and slowly went up the mountain. Qin Weibai stood up and moved forward. She bent down and bent her knees. She bowed every 3 steps and kowtowed every 9 steps. A gust of wind suddenly appeared on the hard mountain road. In the midsummer evening, the gust of wind was biting cold. The leaves all over the sky were swept up by the gust of wind, sharp as knives. Fallen leaves rushed past Qin Weibai one after another. She kowtowed, stepped forward, bent down, knelt down, and moved forward. The leaves kept falling. Drops of blood began to appear on the white shirt, dark red like plum blossoms. The whole world seemed to have a clear resistance. Qin Weibai walked quietly. As the gust of wind passed, leaves swirled. The knife-like leaves were endless. Blood flowed out of Qin Weibai's body, dyed her clothes red, and fell down along her arms. At some point, the goddess, who had been standing at the peak of the dark world since she appeared, never fragile, never delicate, and never retreated, burst into tears. It was not pain. It was an indescribable repentance and guilt. The flying snow of Kunlun, the prosperity of Yuzhou, the sword radiance all over the sky, and the roaring murderous weapons. It was magnificent and a sad song. She bit her lip hard and went all the way up. Blood spilled on the ground. The gust of wind had begun to become violent. Her figure swayed in the wind, but she walked with great determination. It was a long road of thousands of meters. She was dressed in plain clothes and kowtowed countless times. Blood and tears left clear traces in the gust of wind. The wind gradually died down. It was getting dark. Only the last ray of afterglow of the setting sun was still struggling tenaciously. Above the top of the mountain, at the end of the path, Li Honghe, military counselor, Zhou Yuanshan, Dongqing Hanguang, and everyone from the Li family stood here, looking at Qin Weibai, who was getting closer and closer. Phoenix, who was left here by deity, stood at the back of the crowd. Somehow, her face became paler and paler. Dongqing Hanguang looked at Qin Weibai, who kept swaying, and couldn't help saying, What is she going to do?" Li Honghe shook his head. This mountain was his territory. But he didn't think Qin Weibai did all this for him. Li Honghe admitted that he couldn't afford such a big gift. He glanced at military counselor. Military counselor's body trembled slightly, but he didn't mean to speak. The night was completely dark. Qin Weibai kowtowed 3 times and finally reached the end of the mountain road. The gust of wind began to disappear. The fallen leaves were no longer flying. Everything became deathly silent. Qin Weibai's face was pale and she swayed. She passed by Li Honghe and Dongxing Hanguang and went straight ahead. There was a huge bluestone in front of her. In front of the bluestone was a steep hillside. Below the hillside was the glittering West Lake. Qin Weibai walked to the hillside and slowly knelt down in front of the West Lake. Her hands, legs, head, she prostrated herself on the ground. Her voice sounded in the silence, extremely weak and faint. I just want to die without regrets with a sword. All the sounds disappeared completely. An indescribable dead silence enveloped the whole West Lake. Li Honghe suddenly raised his head and looked at the lake. In his sight, the boundless lake water was completely boiling in an instant. Nearly 10,000 meters of water was roaring and surging, as if it was connected with the night sky in the distance. Qin Weibai knelt there, motionless. The boiling lake water suddenly lit up with light. The light seemed to come from the water 10,000 meters away, turning into the purest white. The white light leaped and twisted in the night sky, cutting through the sky. In the silent night, an incomparably dazzling bridge suddenly flashed across. The light spread, and it was colorful. In the night, above the water, there was an incomparably gorgeous and clear rainbow. The rainbow stretched from a distance and fell directly in front of Qin Weibai. In an instant, Li Honghe's body was tense to the limit. Everyone's body was completely tense. In the silence, the rainbow became clearer and clearer, but the boiling water instantly calmed down. An indescribable feeling was approaching in the darkness. It seemed that something was flying in the night, getting closer and closer. No one saw what it was, but the increasingly clear danger hung over everyone's heart. Qin Weibai was motionless. The incomparably clear rainbow suddenly stabilized. Swish! It was like a sharp sword piercing the ground. In the subtle sound, Lonely Mountain, which had been rebuilt for the most part, suddenly shook. Numerous cracks frantically spread across the ground. The rainbow trembled slightly. The sword energy all over the sky surged and broke out, tearing all the buildings on the mountain in an instant. The entire foundation was completely filled with countless cracks in the blink of an eye. Li Honghe finally understood the rainbow in front of him. This colorful and incomparably gorgeous rainbow, which almost covered the starry sky, was 10,000 meters long. This was not a vision of heaven and earth. It was a sword light. The sword light was here. Where was the sword? Qin Weibai had straightened her body. There was nothing in front of her. But everyone could clearly perceive that there was something in front of her. There was an indescribable emotion between heaven and earth. Sharp, fierce, indifferent, and arrogant. There was also a trace of undisguised anger and rejection. Was this the emotion of that sword? A living, invincible sword? Li Honghe's face was full of disbelief. He stood in front of Qin Weibai, trying to see the sword hidden in the nothingness. A colorful light flashed in front of Qin Weibai. It was like a gaze. But in an instant, the extremely condensed sword energy fell directly in front of Li Honghe. Countless rays of sword light engulfed everyone. Dongxing Hanguang's face changed dramatically, and he subconsciously wanted to defend. But the next second, he stopped in shock. Countless sword energy shuttled past them. It didn't hurt him, military counselor, Zhou Yuanshan, or even any veteran of the Li family. All the sword energy gathered into one and aimed directly at Phoenix. Phoenix from the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Phoenix's face was snow white. That incredibly sharp sword light gradually took shape. She could clearly feel that the sword energy was pointing at her abdomen. That was her child. She and God's child. Li Honghe's face changed dramatically. Countless sword energy burst out of his body in an instant. The colorful sword light surged and rushed into the sword energy around Li Honghe. Li Honghe had long been out of his peak state. All the sword energy collapsed under the sword light. The sword light rotated and directly swept him away. But this sword light was also weakened by Li Honghe's full resistance, and finally, it was taken by Phoenix. Phoenix's body shook violently, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were full of horror. There was dead silence on the scene. The people of the Li family didn't know the origin of Phoenix. But they knew her strength. This unknown woman was an expert of the half-step invincible realm. And she was a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. The colorful light swirled slightly. The rainbows in the sky slowly gathered. Qin Weibai stood up slowly, as if she was supporting something in front of her. A huge sword edge revealed a lineup in an instant, and then hid in the nothingness again. But everyone could feel the fury and coldness of this sword at this moment. Don't worry. Qin Weibai held the nothingness in front of her. Her voice was hoarse, but there was a hint of relief in it. It will all be ours. Another wave of rejection swept across the world. This time, there was a little hesitation. Finally, the world gradually quieted down. The sword light that spanned 10,000 meters and formed a rainbow also began to slowly dissipate in the sky. Qin Weibai patted the nothingness with her bloody palm and whispered, "I feel guilty to you, but I have no regrets in this life." There was a slight buzz in front of her, and finally, everything was completely silent. "Thank you," Qin Weibai whispered. "What the hell is this?" After a long time, Dongqing Hanguang, who was still in shock, asked subconsciously. Qin Weibai turned to look at him and whispered, "It's a sword, of course. What kind of sword can be so terrifying?" "No, I should ask how this sword was made." The murderous weapon had a spirit. But spirit did not mean life. This sword was clearly a real life. "This is the invincible realm sword." A weak voice suddenly sounded. Li Honghe looked behind Qin Weibai with a pale face. His pale face had a touch of red. The sword of the invincible realm. Chapter 532. In the rainy season, even if it was dawn in Reki City, the light was still dim. Although this place was not shrouded by the polar night, when there was no sunlight, the whole world was still dark. The rain was still falling, getting heavier and heavier, hitting the whole city. It was still midsummer in the northern hemisphere. The temperature in Reki City, which was close to the polar region, was close to 0 degrees. As the rainy season passed, the whole of Eastern Europe would enter the cold winter. The cold wind under the heavy rain blew open a window of the hotel. Dongqing Rushi, who was sleeping, seemed to feel a little cold. She scratched with her white little hands and seemed to feel some warmth around her in a daze. She instinctively leaned over. As soon as she moved, a tearing pain suddenly came from between her legs. She snorted softly and opened her eyes in a daze. The cold wind poured in from the window. The wind and rain were still the same. The soft light shone in every corner of the room. Dongqing Rushi's vision gradually became clear, and the scenes before she fell asleep began to appear in her mind. The strange pain was still there, and it became more and more clear. A blush gradually appeared on Dongqing Rushi's beautiful pale face, which made her look delicate and charming. The girl became a woman. She reached out and touched her face. The corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows were full of the natural charm of a young woman. Dongqing Rushi frowned slightly. She was a little painful, a little sweet, and a little confused. Li Tianlan slept next to her, holding her whole body in his arms and sleeping soundly. Feeling the palm on her buttocks, her body moved cautiously. Li Tianlan subconsciously held her in his arms again in his sleep and hugged her comfortably. Dongqing Rushi exclaimed, and her red face instantly turned pale because of the pain. She leaned against Li Tianlan obediently and looked at him with her clear and moist eyes for a while. She couldn't help but lower her head and gently bite his chest. Li Tianlan raised his hand in a daze and touched her hair, then put it down again. Dongqing Rushi scratched Li Tianlan's body twice, and there was some grievance in her clear eyes. After coming to the hotel last night, considering Li Tianlan's injury, Dongqing Rushi originally wanted to suppress her shyness and take the initiative, but this bad guy directly tore her clothes. When the two of them fell on the bed, she was already a little confused. The ensuing sharp pain made her sober a little, but it didn't take long for her to sink again. Dongqing Rushi, who had never had this kind of experience, had her mind completely blank. Li Tianlan's conquest was direct and violent. She could clearly feel that she had become extremely small in the extreme pleasure, and she was also coaxed by this bad guy to say a lot of shameful words. For the whole night, she seemed to have been made to cry several times by him, and she was almost crazy. It was not until the night was about to pass that Li Tianlan, who behaved a little differently, held her in his arms domineeringly and then fell asleep peacefully. Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly, blinking her beautiful big eyes. She was a little happy, a little angry, a little infatuated, and a little shy. Li Tianlan was not very calm in his sleep. His brows were always furrowed as if he was under endless pressure. It had only been a day, but his aura was obviously much more stable than last night. Although it was still far from the peak, he was no longer weak. She reached out her hand and smoothed out Li Tianlan's frowning brows. After looking at him for a while, she whispered, "It's really a wild boar." The wild boar was still asleep. Dongqing Rushi moved carefully in his arms. She wanted to leave his arms and take a bath. But Li Tianlan held her very tightly. Dongqing Rushi twisted for a long time, but she couldn't leave. Instead, she was sweating because she had to endure the pain. Dongqing Rushi didn't give up. She wanted to escape carefully, but when her escape plan was finally about to succeed, Li Tianlan's palm held her body again and grabbed her back again. Dongqing Rushi frowned and raised her head, but she saw that Li Tianlan had opened his eyes, and there was a trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Where do you want to go?" he asked softly. When did you wake up?" Dongqing Rushi stammered and avoided his eyes. After the two of them had the most intimate relationship, facing Li Tianlan again, she seemed a little unnatural. "I woke up when you were wriggling." Li Tianlan pulled Dongqing Rushi over, gently bit her delicate earlobe, and said with a low smile, "Again?" Dongqing Rushi's body fell softly beside Li Tianlan, trembling slightly, and murmured, "It hurts." Li Tianlan's breathing was a little rapid, and his movements became more and more presumptuous. He was extremely infatuated with this body and Dongqing Rushi's voice. Unlike Qin Weibai, she was gentle and charming when she was with Li Tianlan. Even though she had once knelt down in front of Li Tianlan, in his heart, Qin Weibai was still a goddess, flawless and dreamlike. When he was with her, Li Tianlan always felt like he was in a dream, always feeling a little unreal. She was also different from Wang Yuetong. The little princess of the Wang family of Beihai was mischievous, and she also had her own style and wildness in bed. Dongqing Rushi, who looked beautiful and pure, was docile and well-behaved after playing with him. She was really obedient. Every time Li Tianlan attacked, she could feel that she was occupying him wantonly. In front of her, Li Tianlan was like a ball of fire, and he always wanted to bully her subconsciously. Dongqing Rushi's body gradually curled up into a ball beside Li Tianlan. She shook her head pitifully and whispered, "No, tomorrow, okay?" Li Tianlan gently played with Dongqing Rushi's ear and chuckled. "If you scream nice, I'll let you go today." "Nice, nice?" Dongqing Rushi opened her eyes wide and looked at Li Tianlan stupidly. "It's not like I didn't scream last night." Li Tianlan looked at her red face, which was like a big ripe apple, and couldn't help but lower his head. Dongqing Rushi reached out to cover his mouth and whispered, "Brush your teeth first." Good brother." Li Tianlan laughed and looked up at the wind and rain outside the window. The shadow and fighting of last night seemed to be gradually far away, completely diluted by last night's charm. At this time, when he thought of it again, it seemed like a lifetime ago. Dongqing Rushi gently bit Li Tianlan's arm, pointed to the floor, and whispered, "Help me get my underwear." Li Tianlan reached out to pick up a small piece of gauze and shook his head. It's all wet and dry now. It's not comfortable to wear. He subconsciously put the gauze to his nose and sniffed it, with a playful smile. Dongqing Rushi's face instantly turned red. She shrank her body in the quilt and didn't move. Take a shower first. Li Tianlan patted her butt and said with a smile, I'll ask someone to send 2 sets of clothes. Dongqing Rushi rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan, hesitated, and slowly sat up. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly. He hesitated for a moment before he finally asked a question that he had been curious about since last night. His body had almost gone completely crazy. Rushi. Why is there no hair? There was silence. Dongqing Rushi sat up wrapped in the quilt and leaned against the bed. Her face was red, and she glared at Li Tianlan. I'm really angry, she said softly, and her clear eyes were a little annoyed. Li Tianlan coughed and felt a little guilty. He laughed dryly and said, I didn't say anything. She's very cute. Dongqing Rushi stretched out her tender white foot and kicked Li Tianlan gently. Go take a shower. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi with soft eyes and even a little doting. I'll be busy next. Dongqing Rushi obediently said, Oh, what are you going to do next? I don't know. Li Tianlan said casually. After last night, the overall situation in Eastern Europe was basically settled. At least the 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State had completely fallen into the hands of Zhongzhou State. Even if others wanted to protest, they had to have the strength. Next, Zhongzhou State would slowly pour resources into Wulan State, and eventually control the 5 Eastern European countries firmly in its own hands. Then, with the 5 countries as the foundation, it would gradually encroach on the whole of Eastern Europe. The whole process was destined to be long. 10 or 20 years were already considered fast. Li Tianlan took this place and only needed to guard it. Everything else was Zhongzhou State's business. I'll go to see Wang Tianzong first in a while, Li Tianlan said. As the Prime Minister of Wulan State, Riker must be very busy now. If he wanted to see him, he would have to wait until midnight. Qin Shilai, Situtsanyue, Tribulation, and Raphael were all seriously injured and unconscious now. He couldn't say anything if he went there now. The Snowdance Corps also suffered heavy losses. The casualties must have been counted. Li Tianlan still had to hold a meeting. The high-level members of the Snowdance Corps killed Morton, Violet, and severely damaged the Eastern Church. The distribution of various interests was also in a mess. At this time, Li Tianlan found that although he had won, the situation in Eastern Europe after the victory had become more and more chaotic. However, after all, this was Zhongzhou State's business. He thought quietly. At present, it was the most important thing to confirm Wang Tianzong's state first. He took out his mobile phone and looked through the address book. He planned to ask someone to send 2 sets of clothes. His clothes could still be worn, but Dongqing Rushi's clothes had been torn into countless strips. However, halfway through the address book, he realized that he actually didn't know many women. He couldn't let a man choose clothes for Dongqing Rushi. At present, there was one person who could do this kind of thing. She was Yunqinshi, the phantom sword master of Mount Shu. However, regardless of seniority or anything else, Li Tianlan had to call Yunqinshi auntie. Naturally, he couldn't let her do this kind of thing. He put down his mobile phone and was in a daze for a while. Then he shook his head, put on his dirty and damaged clothes, and said, There is a shopping mall downstairs. I'll buy you a set of clothes. You take a bath first. Dongqing Rushi said, She was very obedient and quiet. Li Tianlan touched her hair and said with a smile, Good girl. Dongqing Rushi nudged him with her head, carefully moved to the ground with the quilt wrapped around her, and walked to the bathroom with a somewhat unnatural pace. Chapter 533. Wang Tianzong was still in the office of the president. The office of the president only existed in name. The large buildings that had been permeated with the atmosphere of power had been completely shattered by the sword light. The sword light came from the distant sky and crossed 10,000 meters. It traveled in a straight line and tore the square in front of the office of the president. Everything in the office of the president, including the gate, the buildings, the pavilions, the flowers, the trees, the rocks, and the water, were all destroyed into pieces in an instant. Only Wang Tianzong's house stood intact in the ruins, which looked extremely strange. The Snowdance Corps had reassembled. The high-level members of the Snowdance Corps, who had raided and destroyed the two major families in Eastern Europe and severely injured the Eastern Church, had all returned. At this time, they had all returned to the temporary base of the Snowdance Corps. The temporary base was built on a broken parade square, which was equivalent to surrounding Wang Tianzong again. Wang Tianzong had not moved from beginning to end. He was strangely quiet. It was dinner time in the Snowdance Corps. Several guards came in, put the food on the table, and walked out without saying a word. Wang Tianzong, who was standing in front of the window and watching the wind and rain, came to the dining table and sat down. He opened the food box and smiled gently. The entire dark world knew that he was imprisoned here by Li Tianlan. But he was not a prisoner. So he was treated very well here. There were 6 dishes in front of him. They were a combination of meat and vegetables. The dishes were exquisite and looked, smelled, and tasted good. A bowl of soup was also made with a fragrant aroma. Another large food box contained at least 3 or 4 caddies of rice with soft color. In addition, there was a bottle of Maotai with high alcohol content. The messy wind and rain never stopped. The food had a tempting warm taste. Wang Tianzong poured himself a glass of wine, took a sip, and narrowed his eyes. The big screen in the room suddenly flickered. Summer Solstice's figure appeared on the screen, looking a little lazy. "Have you eaten?" "Just ready to eat." Wang Tianzong smiled, looked at the dishes on the table, and joked, "In terms of craftsmanship, the person who cooks for me now is much better than you." Summer Solstice rolled her eyes at Wang Tianzong. She was a little unconvinced, but she did not speak. Wang Tianzong thought that she was very good, but her cooking skills were really unflattering. She had been like this since she was a child. Even in the rare field training in childhood and youth, it was Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu who went to find ingredients, and then Wang Tianzong barbecued them. Xia Zhi was at most an assistant. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and took a sip of wine. His eyes were peaceful. "Has Qinglei contacted you?" Summer Solstice suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong nodded and said yes. Wang Qinglei had called him in the morning. Not only him, but also the 2 giants and several counselors of the Southeast faction had called him to discuss Dongqing Wudi's private transfer of troops. Although it had only been a day since the incident, the whole giant group was shocked and under great pressure, and Dongqing Wudi was under even more pressure. Last night, a deputy commander of the garrison army near the Dongqing clan was dismissed and investigated. A few hours ago, a senior colonel in the Air Force, who was likely to be promoted to Major General in the near future, was also investigated. This senior colonel was the former secretary of the current Air Force commander, Han Lisher, and General Han Lisher had always been one of Dongqing Wudi's most hardcore supporters in the military. A violent storm had already swept through the entire military in one day. Dongqing Wudi targeted the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. At this time, it was reasonable for the Southeast Group to take the lead in fighting back against the giant group. Several giants of the Southeast Group naturally had to ask for Wang Tianzong's opinion in advance. "My attitude has been expressed very clearly," Wang Tianzong said slowly. "Go all out and quit while you're ahead." Go all out. Quit while you're ahead. These were 2 contradictory words, but they were Wang Tianzong's true attitude. Summer Solstice thought about it seriously and said with some uncertainty, "Do you think this incident can't touch the foundation of the giant group?" "The giant group is bound to lose some important positions. But it can't affect the overall situation. Our Beihai is strong, and the Li family is paranoid. But when it comes to self-protection, who can compare with the old master of the Dongqing clan? This time the matter is very big, of course, the nature is also very serious. But if we continue to be persistent, in the end, Li Huaqing will definitely intervene. Now, how can the academics leave the Dongqing clan? Wang Tianzong said indifferently. Summer Solstice held her cheeks in her hands and looked at Wang Tianzong with a smile. She might know these things, but she was too lazy to think about it. She asked directly, why? Because of the Li family. Wang Tianzong thought about it and said slowly, Beihai will not allow the Li family to reappear, nor will Kunlun City and the Prince Group. Now there are only 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, the Southeast Group, the Special Exhibition Group and the Prince Group. Once the academics unite, the survival space of the academics will be very small. The North Group has always been weak. In recent years, it has been getting closer to the neutral party and rarely intervening in other things. But the academics are different. They have a short time to rise and lack of foundation, but they are full of vigor. Now they are in power. How can they have no ambition? The giant group, which has always been close to Kunlun City and Beihai, is the only ally of the academics. Even if Dongqing Wudi makes a big scene this time, Li Huaqing will personally protect Dongqing Wudi at the critical moment. Now what the academics want most is nothing more than to take several important positions in the military from the Dongqing clan. This may make Dongqing Wudi uncomfortable, but it will not make him turn against them, nor will it affect their cooperation. Wang Tianzong lowered his head, lit a cigarette, and continued, if Dongqing Wudi falls, in the current situation, it will be difficult for the academics to put their own people in the position of the Minister of the Army Headquarters. The new Minister of the Army Headquarters is very likely to come from the Southeast Group or Kunlun City. If they lose the military power, the position of the academics will only be more precarious. After all, Li Huaqing's term of office is not long. Summer Solstice blinked. Li Huaqing's term of office was probably less than 4 years, but his influence would not fade seriously in at least 10 years. If we support the academics and replace Dongqing Wudi with their own people? Summer Solstice asked lazily. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. With the strength of the Wang family of Beihai, if they cooperated with the academics after suppressing the giant group, he calculated the odds of winning and finally shook his head. In theory, yes, but Li Huaqing will not accept it. Even if Dongqing Wudi fell because of this, the influence of the Dongqing clan could not be easily eliminated. At that time, it was destined to be a very tragic game. The academics did not have a big advantage in the military. If they sat in Dongqing Wudi's position, they were destined to play with Dongqing Wudi's forces. In this way, the academics would be surrounded by enemies on all sides. In the military, they would have to compete with Dongqing Wudi's forces for military power. In the special warfare system, they would have to compete with Kunlun City's interests. In politics, the Wang family of Beihai and the Prince Group were eyeing them covetously. They were fighting in all aspects. The final result could only be the decline of national power or stagnation. As the ruling group, what good evaluation could the academics have at that time? Even if he accepts it, I can't agree. Wang Tianzong said in a low voice. Zhongzhou State could fight internally, but in any case, it should not affect the stability of the overall situation. This was a principle and a hard demand of the Wang family of Beihai. The reason was very simple. Beihai Province and Zhongzhou State were one. The stronger Zhongzhou State was, the stronger Beihai would be, and vice versa. Summer Solstice replied softly. Wang Tianzong shook his head and suddenly said, how about the coldness of 9 states? Forging the coldness of 9 states was the top priority of the Wang family of Beihai now. Summer Solstice's expression finally became serious. She whispered, the human emperor has begun to integrate with the coldness of 9 states. It will take about a week. A week, Wang Tianzong muttered to himself. There's still time. Summer Solstice said softly. Wang Tianzong nodded. He was silent for a while, then suddenly sighed and said, has Yuetong contacted her family recently? Summer Solstice was stunned and a little lost in thought. She whispered, she hasn't contacted. Since leaving the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Yuetong had never contacted her family. Summer Solstice knew that he and a few young people from the East Emperor Palace were now in Tiannan. Although they had not made any progress for the time being, they had done a good job. However, Wang Yuetong had always been silent. Even when Li Tianlan was in a desperate situation yesterday, Wang Yuetong had been silent. What this meant was self-evident. Wang Tianzong frowned. Summer Solstice looked at Wang Tianzong's expression, and her voice became softer. Old Wang, do you really want to kill him? Li Tianlan, that kid. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Wang Tianzong smiled bitterly without hiding it. Things have come to this. It's not that I want to kill him. It's Tianlan who forces me to kill him. What choice do I have? His smile was frank and helpless. On the night when Li Tianlan went to the battlefield from here, he used many means to talk with Li Tianlan. But what he said was all true. If Li Tianlan agreed to his conditions, he would really hand over the Wang family of Beihai to Wang Yuetong. From now on, if the Wang family of Beihai was not in a life-and-death crisis, he would not show up for the rest of his life. If Li Tianlan agreed to his conditions, there might be no Sword Emperor and Summer Solstice in the Dark World now. Wang Tianzong would only become a name on the stone of formidable person. But there was no if. In this situation, it's not that Beihai can't tolerate him, nor is it that he can't tolerate Beihai. Wang Tianzong shook his head. It's that although Beihai is big, it can't tolerate his ambition. More than 3 years ago, when Wang Yuedong's feelings for Li Tianlan had just sprouted, in Huading, Wang Tianzong had commented that Li Tianlan had wild ambitions and was definitely not a good match. He hit the nail on the head. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window in silence for a long time. After a long time, Summer Solstice suddenly said, "Oh, by the way, what do you think about Jiang Shangyu?" Jiang Shangyu was now appointed as the Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. Now he had gone to Yuzhou to report on his work and would arrive in Eastern Europe in a day or two. From a graduate to the Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, it was already one of the hottest topics in Zhongzhou State. But no matter how popular it was not as shocking as the sudden improvement of his realm. From the beginning of the thunder-shocking realm, he began to rise. Overnight, he crossed the thunder-shocking realm stabilizer, the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu's combat capability directly entered the top level of the half-step invincible realm, which was the combat capability of the invincible realm. Now Jiang Shangyu was not even weaker than Li Tianlan. Compared to his status, his realm was the real leap to the sky, which could be called a miracle. After the breakthrough, Jiang Shangyu's attitude was even more intriguing. He began to break through when Gu Fenghua, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, and General Mo Qingping, the first deputy minister of the general politics, arrived in Beijing. Just the aftermath of the breakthrough seriously injured Gu Fenghua and Mo Qingping, two thunder-shocking realm experts. Such a posture was simply domineering. Although it was only for a day, the whole Zhongzhou state felt the restlessness of the Jiang family in Beijing after many years of low-key. This can't be a breakthrough. Wang Tianzong thought about it seriously and then said slowly, "No one will cross so many realms in a row overnight, no matter how talented he is. We have all seen real geniuses. Even if the ones we have seen before are not the best, Li Tianlan is enough to explain this word. But even he has no possibility of reaching the sky in one step. Geniuses may break through very quickly, but it takes time after all. One night? How is that possible? But it's the truth." Summer Solstice frowned and said quietly, "I suddenly find that we underestimated the Jiang family. I'm not sure about Jiang Shangyu's state, but he will come to Eastern Europe eventually. I can only be sure after seeing him with my own eyes." Wang Tianzong said slowly. Summer Solstice agreed. Wang Tianzong gradually fell silent. Summer Solstice turned off the video at some point, and the room became quiet again. After an unknown period of time, the video communication rang again. Wang Tianzong glanced at it casually, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He hesitated for a moment, but still connected the video. In the study room with rich colors and deep and dignified colors, the figure of Li Huaqing, the president of Zhongzhou State, appeared on the screen. Wang Tianzong casually bowed and said calmly, "Mr. President." On the screen, Li Huaqing nodded with a smile. He looked at the environment around Wang Tianzong and asked straightforwardly without any nonsense, "How is the situation in Wulan State?" This question, which should have been communicated with Li Tianlan, was asked to Wang Tianzong, which seemed a little weird. Wang Tianzong did not hesitate and said flatly, "Now it seems that the situation in Wulan State and several surrounding countries has been stable. It can be said that the general trend has been settled. In this battle, Marshal Li's contribution is indispensable. Yes, I didn't expect Tianlan to do this. Tianzong, it seems that your nomination was correct. You have a good eye for talent." Li Huaqing smiled with some emotion. Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth and did not speak. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him and suddenly said, "I will visit Wulan State in the next few days. I have decided to let the Snowdance Corps take full charge of the affairs in Eastern Europe. If Tianzong has nothing to do, why don't you come back with me?" This sentence was simple and clear, and the meaning it represented was even more simple and clear. Wang Tianzong looked up at Li Huaqing and narrowed his eyes. Li Huaqing's face gradually became serious. In Wulan State, Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps are enough to control the overall situation. Tianzong, you may have resentment in your heart, but national affairs are more important. Tianlan has conquered Wulan State, and it can't be changed. Do you agree with this? With Marshal Li's talent, occupying the 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State is already the limit. If you go further, I'm afraid you will die young." Wang Tianzong said expressionlessly. Li Huaqing frowned and was a little unhappy. However, before he could speak, Wang Tianzong continued, "It's not meaningless for me to stay here. The overall situation of Wulan State has been settled. The overall situation of the 5 Eastern European countries has been settled. Of course, I agree. If Marshal Li wants the land of the 5 countries, I can give it to him. But what I want here is the whole of Eastern Europe. Do you agree with this?" "I don't agree." Chapter 534. Wang Tianzong turned to look at the door. In front of the empty door, there was the sound of wind and rain falling, illusory and illusory. Li Tianlan appeared silently in front of the door with a calm face. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. Their eyes met for a moment. At this moment, even Li Huaqing, who was thousands of miles away, could feel the indescribable sharpness through the screen. He frowned slightly and said slowly, "I know that you have different ideas, but you are both pillars of Zhongzhou State, even the pillar of Zhongzhou State. Now you are fighting outside, I hope you can take the overall situation as the most important thing." He paused. In the somewhat awkward silence, his eyes gradually became sharp, and he said indifferently, "This is not a suggestion." If it was not a suggestion, it was naturally a request. It could even be said to be an order. Wang Tianzong smiled indifferently and said softly, "President, you worry too much. Marshal Li is young, but his sharpness is so strong that even I will be moved. Of course, I will cherish such a talent and give him full respect." Li Huaqing chuckled and looked at Li Tianlan with meaningful eyes. "His Majesty has always been a model for me to learn from. I have always respected him. Rest assured, President. I know what I should do." Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong and said expressionlessly. Li Huaqing shook his head and thought that it was all bullshit. But no matter what, at least this was the clear attitude of these two. His face relaxed slightly and he said indifferently, "That's good. I will visit Wulan State in the near future. I'll trouble you to take care of many affairs in Eastern Europe." Wang Tianzong did not speak. Li Tianlan nodded. Li Huaqing took a deep look at the two of them, hesitated, and finally hung up the phone. The room was quiet again. Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan looked at each other quietly, and the atmosphere was subtle and weird. After a long time, Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows and asked casually, "Have you eaten?" "I ate before I came, and I can have more." Li Tianlan walked to the table and sat down. He quietly filled a bowl of rice for himself and poured a glass of wine at the same time. Wang Tianzong also sat down. Li Tianlan calmly raised his glass. The two of them clinked their glasses and drained the wine in one gulp. The silence continued. Time passed slowly. The food on the table gradually decreased. Nearly 5 caddies of rice were swept clean by the two of them, and only less than half of the bottle of Maotai was left. Wang Tianzong slowly picked up a tissue and wiped his mouth. Suddenly, he said, "You did a good job in Wulan State. I did not come here today to listen to your praise." Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and handed it to Wang Tianzong. His tone was flat. Wang Tianzong smiled. He meant what he said. The game in Wulan State could be said to be the first fight between Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan. He left the Caesar Hotel and was imprisoned here. So anything that happened in Wulan State last night had nothing to do with him. Even if Li Tianlan died, it had nothing to do with him. The Shadow Throne, Rothschild, the Eastern Church, Morton, and Violet. They were all chips in Wang Tianzong's hands. The balance of victory tilted toward Wang Tianzong countless times. In their first fight, Li Tianlan lost and was almost doomed eternally. But in the end, it was the Li family who won. Most of the forces began to withdraw from Eastern Europe. The Shadow Throne was disbanded, and King Tong was disabled. Even Paul's injury was extremely serious. The war potential of Rothschild for at least 5 or even 10 years in the future was completely exhausted. Before last night, Wang Tianzong's most reliable ally was the Shadow Throne. At that time, there was no tyrant around him. After last night, he found tyrant, but he also lost the Shadow Throne. Overnight, Wang Tianzong's loss could be said to be extremely heavy. However, Wang Tianzong was not angry. Things had developed to this point, which almost meant that at least in the chaos of Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong had lost the best chance to get rid of Li Tianlan, and he could only look forward. He lit the cigarette, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "The president will visit Wulan State in the near future. What do you think of this?" "It's a good thing." Li Tianlan took a sip of the fragrant soup and said casually, "I welcome him with both hands. But Wulan State and several neighboring countries may not welcome him." Wang Tianzong said in a short tone. "It's not up to him." Li Tianlan shook his head lightly. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan quietly. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, "I have some candidates here. You might as well think about it. I think they can follow the president to Wulan State. This is a good thing for Wulan State, Zhongzhou State, you and me." Li Tianlan's action of serving the soup paused slightly, and he looked up at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were emotionless, and he said lightly, "Cooperation?" Wang Tianzong said calmly, "Think about it. Forget it." Li Tianlan put down the bowl in his hand and said straightforwardly. He didn't even ask Wang Tianzong who he wanted to recommend. At this moment, for Zhongzhou State, Wulan State, Li Tianlan, and the giant group, the most important thing was Li Huaqing's visit to Wulan State. This was a major event that attracted worldwide attention. In the past 2 decades, this was the first time that the president of Zhongzhou State had visited Wulan State. And following Li Huaqing was a huge delegation. However, it was strange that there were very few officials in this huge delegation of more than 300 people. Most of them were important figures in some wealthy families in Zhongzhou State, or the bosses of some large groups in some countries. What this meant was self-evident. For Zhongzhou State, this was a feast. During this visit, Prime Minister Riker of Wulan State would sign an agreement with President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State on behalf of Wulan State. The agreement was still being drawn up, but there was one crucial clause. After the agreement was signed, the 5 Eastern European countries centered on Wulan State would pay at least 2 trillion in war reparations to Zhongzhou State. This sum of reparations was enough to completely drain the financial resources of several countries in a short period of time. They could only rely on Zhongzhou State financially. What followed was Zhongzhou State's investment in several countries. This was an almost undisguised plunder. And these plunderers were members of the delegation that followed Li Huaqing to visit. The members of the delegation covered almost all fields, including military industry, banking, finance, energy, trade, real estate, media, tourism, hotel, catering, construction, food, and so on. The 5 Eastern European countries would usher in a real new situation. At this time, as long as the members of the delegation that followed Li Huaqing had something to gain, they would gain a lot. The power of Zhongzhou State would continue to develop in a monopolistic manner in all fields of the 5 countries. All the wealth of the 5 countries would flow into Zhongzhou State continuously. If they took down the 5 Eastern European countries, Zhongzhou State could at least have tens of millions of more jobs, and then liberate more labor force. The national strength would also slowly increase. Within 5 years, the 5 Eastern European countries would be tightly tied to Zhongzhou State. Within 20 years, a word from Zhongzhou State could completely overturn all the patterns of the 5 Eastern European countries. Within 50 years, the 5 Eastern European countries would completely become vassals of Zhongzhou State. This was war. On both sides of victory and defeat, there were insane profits and desperate circumstances. If Zhongzhou State wanted to achieve all these goals, what it needed was stability. The Arctic Ocean Command and the Snowdance Corps were the cornerstones of stability. At this time, every giant or group that followed Li Huaqing here would get the opportunity to develop rapidly and rise continuously in the future as long as they could gain a foothold here. Under such circumstances, whether they could stay or not depended on the will of Zhongzhou State. But whether they could gain a foothold after staying or not depended on the attitude of Li Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing's visit to Eastern Europe would take about a week or half a month. Li Tianlan only needed to make good use of this time to establish a huge network of contacts in Zhongzhou State. The rise of the Li family would also be a foregone conclusion. Wang Tianzong wanted to stop all this, but after last night, the overall situation had been settled. Even he could not change it. Under such circumstances, Wang Tianzong could only choose to cooperate with Li Tianlan. He could not take away the 5 Eastern European countries, so he could only get a share of the following feast. However, Li Tianlan refused his request without hesitation. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Wang Tianzong laughed and said, "You should listen to my conditions. Even if it's a life-and-death feud, sometimes we can cooperate." "Go ahead." Li Tianlan said blandly, "It's just that I'm not ready to accept it." Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said blandly, "As I said, you took down the 5 Eastern European countries and held them. They are yours. But my eyes are on the whole of Eastern Europe. You and I are now cooperating in the 5 Eastern European countries. When the whole of Eastern Europe falls into the hands of Beihai, I will not treat you badly." "The whole of Eastern Europe?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "You used all your means last night. In this situation, can you still take the whole of Eastern Europe? Maybe in a few years, you will understand that in the general trend, some means are the most useful and the most useless. I'm the Sword Emperor. It doesn't matter if I don't have means, as long as I have a sword." Wang Tianzong said calmly. "Your sword is still not good enough." Li Tianlan said blandly. Wang Tianzong was very strong. As the only half-step chosen one in the dark world, he was only half a step away from the real supreme. But half a step was also a distance. At least in Li Tianlan's eyes, Wang Tianzong's strength was not invincible. "It's a little worse, but not far from it." Wang Tianzong said calmly, "My sword energy is enough, and my sword intent is a little short of perfection." "But is your sword intent really perfect?" "What do you mean?" Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong with deep eyes. Wang Tianzong laughed and said, "It doesn't mean anything. Your sword intent may be perfect, but obviously, the sword stroke last night was not. The sword intent of that stroke seemed to have reached the peak, but it was still a little bit short, really just a little bit. He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and said, "So, you want to use that sword to mislead me and stop me from breaking through?" Li Tianlan's pupils shrank slightly. "I've finished that sword." Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan calmly. He said softly, "Thank you." Chapter 535. At this moment it was really hard for Li Tianlan to describe his feelings. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong stood in front of the Wang family of Beihai. For Li Tianlan, no matter in martial arts or in the future, he could be said to be his biggest enemy. The most important thing was that Wang Tianzong's will was extremely firm. He did not have the unique conditions of wind and thunder veins and heavenly king heart. Even among his peers, he was not the best in terms of aptitude. But it was such a person who walked step by step to the peak of the invincible realm, and then broke through to the half-step invincible realm. Now he was only a step away from the chosen one. The most important thing was that this step seemed to be unable to stop Wang Tianzong. Li Tianlan's inner premonition was very clear. Wang Tianzong would definitely be able to break through, and it would not take too long. Because of this, he fought with Wang Tianzong at the peak. His sword intent was perfect. His sword intent was supreme. It was no exaggeration to say that Li Tianlan could now instruct anyone in swordsmanship. What he lacked was the realm of martial arts, or the sword energy. But in terms of height, he could be said to be the one standing at the highest point in martial arts. So after borrowing deity's sword energy, the combat capability he exerted was even far greater than that of deity himself. That was why he and Wang Tianzong had an earth-shattering sword strike. In terms of sword intent, that sword strike was truly perfect, but it was slightly lacking in explosive power. Not to mention the peak of the invincible realm, even the half-step chosen one could hardly perceive the gap. What Wang Tianzong needed now was the truly perfect sword intent. Li Tianlan believed that his sword strike could bring him a lot of inspiration. If Wang Tianzong broke through with this sword strike as the foundation, even if he succeeded, he would still be a little lacking. This was a quiet misdirection, which was equivalent to putting a boulder in Wang Tianzong's way of swordsmanship. However, Wang Tianzong saw the shortcomings of this sword strike and even made up for it. So the boulder in the way of swordsmanship became a bridge to the sky. Li Tianlan took a sip of the wine in the cup and took a deep look at Wang Tianzong. After a long time, he sincerely said, "Amazing. You flatter me." Wang Tianzong said blandly, without pride or displeasure. Li Tianlan's realm was not high, and his combat capability was nothing in Wang Tianzong's eyes. But in the whole dark world, he was the only one who was qualified to discuss swordsmanship with Wang Tianzong. This alone was worthy of Wang Tianzong putting Li Tianlan on the same level as himself. "But you haven't broken through yet," Li Tianlan said slowly. If Wang Tianzong could really complete the sword intent of that sword, it was enough to show that his swordsmanship had really reached the advanced level. Then what he was facing now should be the chosen one. Let's wait a little longer. Wang Tianzong said calmly, "If I break through now, I have 80% confidence. But since I have 100% confidence, why only 80%? After a moment of silence, Li Tianlan nodded and said, "That makes sense." Wang Tianzong didn't say much but raised his glass. The two of them drank up the wine in their glasses. Wang Tianzong poured 2 more glasses and put the almost empty bottle aside. Li Tianlan played with the cup in his hand and looked at Wang Tianzong. His calm eyes were a little complicated. "What are you thinking about?" Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. The trial day was over. The overall situation in Eastern Europe was basically settled. If there was no God-given opportunity, Wang Tianzong was unlikely to attack Li Tianlan in Eastern Europe. So today, he was extraordinarily calm. "You've made all the preparations." Li Tianlan sighed softly, lit a cigarette, and took a deep puff. Wang Tianzong smiled and did not deny it. After completing Li Tianlan's sword, the real path had appeared in front of him. It could even be said that he was almost not far from the real chosen one. He didn't break through now, just waiting for an opportunity. As for the preparation before the breakthrough, Wang Tianzong had been perfect, whether it was his physical state, sword energy, sword intent, sword momentum, or mentality. What he lacked now was a sword that could fully exert all his combat power. The coldness of 9 states was also being forged. Now he really didn't need to prepare anything anymore. He just needed to wait. This was Wang Tianzong's perfect path. More than 20 years ago, since the collapse of the Li family, Wang Tianzong had officially broken through to the invincible realm. To this day, his martial arts seemed to have been smooth and singing all the way, but almost no one could see what Wang Tianzong had suffered for it. Li Tianlan could imagine that kind of mountain-like pressure. There were still 2 experts at the peak of the invincible realm in this generation of the Wang family of Beihai. But for many years, Wang Tianzong had carried the Wang family of Beihai alone and was invincible in the dark world. He only advanced and never retreated. At home and abroad, there were bloody storms, mutual deception, and sword shadows. No matter what he encountered, he could only move forward. He would either rush over or die on the way forward. The Wang family of Beihai was the peak of the world. How could he retreat from such a height? If he took a step back, the entire Wang family of Beihai would face a bottomless abyss. And all the pressure had been on Wang Tianzong alone for many years. Under great pressure, Wang Tianzong finally found a perfect path of his own, which was to reach the chosen one. Li Tianlan was in a daze. He also had his own perfect path. However, he encountered some problems at this time. Although these problems were possible to be solved after the battle last night, it seemed to be just a possibility at this time. I'm thinking about my future path. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said calmly, Your Majesty, do you have any suggestions? One of them represented the Sword Emperor of the Wang family. The other represented the Marshal of the Li family. Perhaps just a few minutes ago, neither of them had thought that the topic would go deep to this extent. Wang Tianzong used Li Tianlan's sword to make up for his own path to the chosen one. Now, Li Tianlan was asking Wang Tianzong for advice. Wang Tianzong did not refuse. His eyes were serious and deep. After thinking for a while, he said slowly, Too perfect is imperfect. Your strength, speed, willpower, and sword intent are all complete, but your realm is too low now. This problem can't be solved at all. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and did not hide it. This might be the biggest problem on his martial arts road, or even the only problem. At this time, if he were in the invincible realm, with such perfect conditions concentrated on him, he could break through to the peak of the invincible realm in the shortest time and stand at the same height as Wang Tianzong. But he had not entered the invincible realm yet. His strength, speed, and sword intent could not be perfectly integrated, which was equivalent to cutting off the possibility of entering the invincible realm. But only by using the current conditions to rush into the invincible realm could he really reach the supreme realm of the chosen one. This was like an endless loop. The road was very clear, but Li Tianlan could not go through it. In your Majesty's opinion, what are the 4 realms of martial arts? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong chuckled and said flatly, Martial arts is martial arts. There is no difference between the 4 realms of martial arts. The reason why the seniors divided the martial Dao into 4 realms was because they wanted to find a path on the martial Dao. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly lit up for a moment. There is no problem that cannot be solved. If you want to solve your problem, you can only find a way in the 4 realms of martial arts. Wang Tianzong continued. Li Tianlan nodded and said calmly, I think so, too. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said seriously, but your martial art seems to bypass the 4 realms of martial arts, so it becomes so embarrassing. Since the 4 realms of martial arts can be bypassed, why can't the invincible realm be bypassed? Li Tianlan asked. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. He looked at Li Tianlan and did not speak for a long time. I saw a man without a realm, without the 4 realms of martial arts, and without the invincible realm. Li Tianlan said quietly. Wang Tianzong nodded and did not speak. Of course, he knew who Li Tianlan was talking about. Li Tianlan was talking about the one who lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan last night. Strictly speaking, deity of the purgatory of heaven capital had no realm. He was not in the invincible realm, nor did he stay in any of the 4 realms of martial arts. He cultivated a pure sword, which was incomparably fierce. When the sword light was unsheathed, its power was no less than that of the peak of the invincible realm. The battle in the case of treason destroyed all the foundation of deity's martial arts. He could only find another way to take the present road, but it seemed that this was his limit. Similarly, I have also seen 2 lunatics who did not take the usual road. One went straight to the invincible realm from the chi-controlling realm, and the other wanted to go straight to the invincible realm from the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianlan continued. Of course, it was clear who these 2 people were talking about. Wang Tianzong shook his head and said, Tribulation state is very problematic. Although he succeeded, it was no different from failure. As for Fireman, even if he succeeded that year, it is estimated that the current tribulation will also have problems. That can only mean that their path still needs to continue to be perfected. Li Tianlan said calmly, in my opinion, the 4 realms of martial arts do not exist. The so-called chi-controlling realm represents speed, the ice-condensing realm represents sword energy and sword intent, the fire-flaming realm is willpower, and the thunder-shocking realm is power. He looked at Wang Tianzong and whispered, if this is the case, what is the invincible realm? There seemed to be countless sword lights flashing in Wang Tianzong's eyes, and he did not speak for a while. It is perfect. Li Tianlan said indifferently, too perfect is imperfect? I don't agree with this. If too perfect is imperfect, it can only mean that such perfection is not really perfect. So, Wang Tianzong's tone was as heavy as a sea. Do you want to recultivate the 4 realms of martial arts? I didn't recultivate. As I said, I don't agree with the so-called 4 realms of martial arts. I just think that since my strength and speed are too perfect to be integrated, what will happen if they continue to be perfect and go to the real limit? Li Tianlan lowered his head and said slowly. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and was silent for a long time. If there was no 4 realms of martial arts, where was the limit of human speed? Where was the limit of power? Where was the limit of sword energy? At least in the current successful example, Tribulation, who only cultivated the chi-controlling realm, had reached the invincible realm. But obviously, Tribulation's path was not the limit, because he encountered problems. This was Li Tianlan's current idea. According to his idea, speed and strength, or any other condition, if reached the limit, should have the combat capability comparable to the peak of the invincible realm. The speed alone was equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm. The strength was also equivalent to the peak of the invincible realm. When strength, speed, sword energy, sword intent, and willpower reached the peak of the invincible realm, what would be the result? If there was such a day, would Li Tianlan still need to integrate these things? Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. At this moment, he really felt the pressure from Li Tianlan, which was majestic and heavy, like a new world. If this is the case, all the realms of martial arts are meaningless to you. Including the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong said slowly after a long silence. Martial arts itself doesn't need realms. Li Tianlan raised his head and looked at Wang Tianzong. For me, if there are realms, there are only 2 realms. Under the Chosen One is supreme. He chuckled. Invincible realm? Look at the so-called invincible realm who died last night. How ridiculous. Under the Chosen One. The Chosen One was supreme. This was the purest martial arts. Clear and distinct. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath, but he didn't feel happy. For a moment, he felt suffocated. He suddenly didn't know what to say. After a long time, he shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "How bold you are. This is my kendo. Li Tianlan said slowly. This was the inspiration brought to him by deity's sword energy last night, but it could also be regarded as his original idea. It was just that he didn't think about this problem before he really encountered a problem. It wasn't until the punch he threw at Jiang Qinyan on the date of death but didn't make him realize this problem. Last night, his idea became clear. It's feasible. Wang Tianzong said slowly after a long silence. The path that Li Tianlan saw himself was really amazing, but Li Tianlan had the courage to show his path to himself, and Wang Tianzong also had the courage to recognize Li Tianlan's path. Without this magnanimity, what kind of chosen one was? When I succeed in martial arts, no matter what position you and I are in at that time, alive or dead, I should toast you. Li Tianlan laughed. Perhaps only he knew what Wang Tianzong's words meant to him. Wang Tianzong looked at him and narrowed his eyes slightly. What is kendo? He asked suddenly. Kendo is kendo. Li Tianlan looked calm. Wang Tianzong nodded and said faintly, I know my sword. My kendo is a mountain, which can accommodate everything. And your kendo is a sword, which can penetrate everything. If you and I are both chosen ones, you are no match for me. His voice was clear, slow, and grand, and he said each word with majestic sword energy. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, then he picked up the glass in front of him and drank up the last wine. He stood up, walked to the door, and said faintly, fallacy. His figure was getting farther and farther, but his voice was still clear. My kendo is a way, which can destroy everything, and naturally can accommodate everything. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.